Welcome back to Weird Worlds. Join us on a journey through this collection of 6 stories from old, dusty, weird pulp magazines. I have added a timestamp for each story in the video description. Before we begin, I invite you to pause for a moment and share in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time of day it is for you.
A Cold Night for Crying by Stephen Marlowe. It's much easier to believe than disbelieve, whether it's a truth or an untruth, when you have to. And when the brain and body are weak, the snow sifted silently down. Clouds of white confetti in the glare of the street lamps, mantling the streets with white, spilling softly from laden, wind-stirred branches drifting with the wind and embanking the scars and stumps of buildings that remained of what had been the city. Mr. Friedlander trudged across the wide, quiet avenues, his bare, balding head burrowed low in his tattered collar for warmth, chin against chest, wet, feet numb and stinging with cold inside his torn overshoes, which could not be replaced until next winter, and then only if the karate did not decrease the clothing rations still further. All the way home he conjured fantasies from the white, multi-shaped exhalations of his breath. Here it was the smoke of a good Havana rolled cigar. There the warm hissing steam from a radiator valve, and later the magic carpet clouds from the funnel of an ocean liner that might take him to far warm places. The karate had not reached. Almost he thought he heard the great sonorous drone of the ship's whistle, but it was the toot of an automobile horn as the sleek vehicle came skidding around a corner, almost running down Mr. Friedlander before it disappeared in the swirling flurries of snow. He thought if he followed the tire tracks before the snow could cover them, he would discover in which section of the city these particular karate lived. But he shook his fist instead, knowing the gesture would bring at worst a reprimand. In the dim hallway of his tenement, smelling pungently of cabbage and turnips, and from somewhere way in back the faint, unmistakable aroma of beef, Mr. Friedlander shook the snow from his coat and stamped his numb feet before he climbed the 3 dark flights to his apartment. At each landing he would pause and look with longing and resentment at the door of the unused elevator shaft, then shrug and wonder why the karate had denied man even this simple luxury. On the floor, below his own, Mr. Friedlander heard the unmistakable crackling sound of a shortwave radio receiver. The fools. He wasn't going to talk. He lost no love on the karate, but there were others. There were neighbors, friends, brothers, even wives. There were the obvious quislings you shunned, and the less obvious ones you didn't suspect until it was too late. One thing you never did was listen to the shortwave radio. So defiantly its crackling could be heard, not merely on the other side of the door, but all the way out on the landing. The punishment was death. Mr. Friedlander paused in front of his own door, where the odor of strong yellow turnips assailed his nostrils. It was so unsatisfyingly familiar, he almost gagged. The new generation hardly remembered the delightful old foods. But if Mr. Friedlander shut his eyes and thought, he could clearly smell steak and roast chicken and broiled lobster, swimming in butter and a dry red wine to wash everything down slowly. So slowly he could taste every tiny morsel. He pushed open the door and began to shrug off his worn coat. "I am home," he said to the scabby walls, the gas range which had been converted to wood when the karate suspended all public utilities, to the bubbling pot which exuded the turnip smell, to the drab sofa, the 2 wooden chairs, the table he had constructed from 2 old saw-horses, and the planking he had found long ago after the 14th Street bomb. From the small bedroom, he heard sobbing. Mrs. Friedlander blinked red-rimmed eyes at him and squeezed his hand, wringing it as if it had been a wet rag. She was 44 years old, 6 years younger than Mr. Friedlander, with a face which once had been comely but now was lined, gaunt, and big-pored. She was even thinner than Mr. Friedlander, but looked shapeless in her thick woolen sweater and the baggy work trousers he had stolen from the quartermaster store of the plant where he worked. "Tried to tell me, Martha," he said. "It's good to talk." She looked at him mutely, opening her mouth to talk but swallowing instead. "You tell me, Martha. There now." She managed to get the words out. "It's Freddie." Mr. Friedlander placed a tired arm about her shoulder. The feeling had started in the pit of his stomach, like when their son George had died of pneumonia 2 years ago this month. The karate had outlawed all wonder drugs, all hospitals, all medical schools. Helpless, they had watched George die, his big child eyes not understanding, asking for help. Mr. Friedlander always wondered if he had died hating them. "People die and you see them, you know," Mrs. Friedlander said. "They are sick and you can't do anything but try to nurse them anyway. Or the big karate cars run them down, and you see the broken body. You see them alive, then dead. It's hard, so hard. You want to stop living too, but there is God, and God shows you they are dead, and you have the memories, all the sweet ones. You know they're dead because you see them dying. You can forget in time. You forget. You have to forget because otherwise you don't want to live. But you hold me tight." Mr. Friedlander patted her hair awkwardly. The karate not only condoned, but encouraged displays of simple emotion, and for that reason Mr. Friedlander tried to avoid them. "What are you trying to tell me?" he asked. "Freddie! Freddie! His plane was shot down over the mountains, they told me. Freddie is dead. Freddie!" Mr. Friedlander stopped, patting his wife's hair, stopped stroking the tangles into a smooth glossiness. He bent down and carefully unbuckled his torn overshoes, placing them carefully in a corner of the room. Then he walked to the window and stared out at the snow, sparkling in wind-blown puffs under the street lamp, which remained only because the karate liked to drive their confiscated autos at night. "What are you saying?" he asked his wife. Just because they tell us Freddie is dead." "Stop it! Don't say that Freddie is dead." "Because they tell us, that's no reason to believe. How can we believe? We saw Freddie alive, but now they tell us Freddie is dead, far away, 2,000 miles over the mountains. Did we see him die?" "He's dead." "Oh, he's dead. But we'll never learn to live with it, don't you see? How can we believe? How can we know? We saw him alive, now he's dead." Freddie was flying a karate plane against the last strongholds of free man in the Rocky Mountains. Not because Freddie had wanted to pilot the Dart Swift craft particularly, but because they had made him. The karate announced their own human losses readily, almost as if they took great pleasure in the impressive figures. "They told you this?" Mr. Friedlander asked. "That Freddie's plane was shot down, that he is assumed dead. You saw nothing in writing. They sent a man. You knew him. No. He wore good clothing. He drove up in a sleek karate car, quizzling. Freddie died a hero's death, he said, against the rebels. Rebels. Trying to preserve their own freedom. Freedom, which we lost because the bombed cities couldn't survive. I only know what the man told me, but how can we? How all my life, always forever, I will be praying and waiting for Freddie to walk in right behind you through that door. We never saw him die. They should at least send something. Some proof. Anything to make me understand he is dead." Mr. Friedlander had been thinking the same thing. If you loved someone, your son, all his life, and then a stranger came and said he was dead, you could forget. The stranger came and go on thinking of that someone. Your son, alive and not dead, but too busy to come and see you, eating the food you could only dream about, sleeping in a warm bed in some clean place far away. Only it was like the cat he once had read about. You took the cat and gave it food, catnip, but every time it ate, you also fed it electricity, a shock. It wanted to eat, but it was afraid of the electricity, the shock. It starved to death, screeching from hunger in a room full of food. If that was what the karate wanted, he would say Freddy was dead. He would believe and laugh every time he saw them, because they thought he was screeching from hunger in a room full of food. "Stop it," Mr. Friedlander told his wife. "You stop that. If they say so, then Freddy is dead. We must put an announcement in the karate newspaper and make plans for a funeral in all this snow. It's so cold anyway." Mrs. Friedlander walked to the stove and stirred the bubbling turnip water. "You come and eat your supper," she said. "We'll talk about Freddy later. There is nothing to talk about." "Only the funeral. Maybe he was lying, the stranger." "Stop that. It's what they want. They want us to be animals. They want us never to know, always doubting, always clean in dirty places, working hard, using all our energy to be only a little better than animals. Every time you see a karate, you won't hate him. You'll think maybe he's going to tell you some good news about Freddy. It was all a mistake. They want that too. They feed on our sorrow and despair and confusion. There is a word for them and their invasion and why they are here. They don't need us, our resources. They feed on what we feel. They are a sadistic fungi, Fred. Eat your supper, and you'll feel better. You must be half frozen. It's warmer in here." Mrs. Friedlander shivered, although she stood near the stove. "It's still cold. I hope it's warm where Freddy is." He slapped her, and was glad when she cried, then sorry, then glad again when she came into his arms, sobbing. They would make funeral arrangements in the morning. After supper, a man from the karate newspaper visited them. He wore a new overcoat and shining plastic overshoes, and a bright scarf of red wool around his neck. His face was plump, his cheeks rosy, his well-groomed hair smelling of some expensive perfume when he removed hat and earlaps. "Mr. and Mrs. Friedlander," he said, his voice like the dimly remembered taste of pure maple syrup, "I bring you the heartfelt sympathies of the karate newspaper. If it is any consolation, know that your son, Freddy Friedlander, Jr., died a hero's death against the barbarians of the mountains. His nose was running with the cold. He patted it daintily with a pale blue silk handkerchief. He offered Mr. Friedlander a small, dry, crackling cigar, took one himself, and touched flame to them with a monogrammed lighter. Mr. Friedlander inhaled gratefully, allowing the unfamiliar smoke to sear his lungs painfully before he exhaled a long blue plume at the ceiling. For Mrs. Friedlander, the man from the karate newspaper had a small box of candy, the chocolate frozen over with powdery white, but by the expression on Mrs. Friedlander's face, succulent, nevertheless. "At times like this," the man from the karate newspaper said, after he had politely refused what was left of the yellow turnip mash, "it is customary to place an ad in the newspaper in memory of the departed. The cost in such cases is quite reasonable, benevolent, you might say. 7 days of overtime for Mr. Friedlander? But," said Mrs. Friedlander, "if we place the announcement in the karate newspaper, don't you see? We are admitting Freddy is dead." The man from the karate newspaper cocked an eyebrow in practiced surprise. "He is quite dead, Mrs. Friedlander. What my wife means is that, well, we didn't see him die." "Then you don't believe the karate?" "That's not it at all," said Mr. Friedlander. "If Freddy is dead, it is unhealthy not to believe. We want to believe. We find it difficult. I understand," the man said. "I would suggest a large ad in that case. 2 weeks overtime." "Mr. Friedlander, write it yourself. Don't use any of the forms. Write it from your heart, from what you feel deep inside." "I suppose that is best," Mr. Friedlander admitted, secretly amazed at his own objective reaction to his son's passing. The sorrow would come later, he told himself. The grief, when it came, would be good. It would wash them clean so they could live again. Even at the funeral, he guessed, they would walk slowly with measured tread and be sad, but they would expect Freddie to join them in their sadness, as if it were a funeral, but not his funeral at all. Mr. Friedlander was about to tell this to the man from the karate newspaper because he thought it was a great truth and he had discovered it when there was a knock on the door. It was Mr. Davidson from downstairs on the second floor, a small old man, just bones and clothing and a high voice, who lived alone in the apartment where his wife had died 4 years before of old age. It was said that karate wanted old men like Mr. Davidson to go on living because they were unproductive and had to be cared for by younger people who could hardly make ends meet, thus lowering the standard of living. Everyone in the tenement took turns inviting Mr. Davidson in for dinner. "Beautiful snow, isn't it?" Mr. Davidson demanded, puckering his dry lips in a toothless grin. "Have you heard about Freddie? Have you heard the news?" He seemed spitefully cheerful, Mr. Friedlander thought. Happy because he had outlived a man 2 generations his junior, if indeed it was such a case of sadistic glee. So, like the karate themselves, Mr. Friedlander made a mental note to stop inviting the old man to share their dinner. "Yes, sir, great news," chirped Mr. Davidson. Then, "Who's your friend?" "He's from the karate newspaper," Mrs. Friedlander explained. "Here to see about placing an announcement in the paper." "Damned quisling," spat Mr. Davidson. The old folks certainly had privileges. That remark would mean a month of overtime from Mr. Friedlander, who turned earthenware kitchen pots on an archaic wheel. All it earned Mr. Davidson was a scowl from the man from the karate newspaper. "What great news are you talking about?" the man wanted to know. "Great news." "Who said anything about great news? Why don't you mind your own business?" "Anyway, you said it, old man. Great news, you said. I want to know. Maybe I did, and maybe I didn't. You did." "Don't always remember just what were we talking about, Freddie Friedlander, wasn't it?" "Yes. Like I said, great news. We all don't get to die a hero's death." "No, sir. Look at me now. Die in bed one of these nights, just like that." Claw-like fingers snapped and made a singularly dry sound. "Who'll care? Who'll know until I don't show up for dinner one night? Great news. Great thing to die. A hero's death, I always say." The man from the karate newspaper smiled. "I certainly misunderstood you, old-timer. I like your attitude. If the boy is dead, let's look at the bright side of the picture." All at once, Mrs. Friedlander wailed Freddie's name and cupped her face in coarse, work-hardened hands. "Freddie's dead," she sobbed. "Dead, dead, dead." Mr. Friedlander gulped and turned away. If he touched her now, he would break down too. He plopped a fork in the turnip mash and made little tracks with the tines, crisscrossing them like the tracks in the deserted railroad yards down by the river. "You see," the man from the karate newspaper said, "that's exactly what I said. The announcement is good for you. Let other people know about Freddie, and you will be able to live with your terrible loss. This man has been very helpful." "Please," Mr. Friedlander told him, "for not now, but now is exactly the time." The man explored through his pockets and found an announcement blank for Mr. Friedlander. A stiff yellow sheet of paper, folded over crisply 3 times, with words printed in uppercase letters and many blank lines to be filled in. Mr. Friedlander read it, handed it back to the man from the karate newspaper, who then asked questions and filled in the blanks with a precise hand as Mr. Friedlander answered him. The man stood up, giving Mr. Friedlander another small cigar and giving 2 of them to Mr. Davidson. "Karate blessings on you," he said. "You'll be notified at work about your overtime, Mr. Friedlander. When will we see it in the newspaper? Tomorrow, afternoon edition. Karate blessings." The man was gone. "There," said Mr. Friedlander, "go ahead and cry. It will do you good. Cry all you want, young jackass," muttered Mr. Davidson. "Thought he'd never leave. And don't you cry, young lady. Laugh, sing, jump for joy. I couldn't tell you the great news about Freddie while that man was here." "We heard about Freddie," Mr. Friedlander said in a chill voice. "Will you please go downstairs? You heard baloney, or you wouldn't be talking like that. Freddie ain't dead. What did you say?" Mr. Friedlander stood perfectly still, in the center of the room, his back to the stove, trying to peer through the window which by now had frosted over. Mrs. Friedlander had stopped, her crying hands clasped in front of her, below her waist, in an obsequious oriental pose which the karate promoted. I said, "Freddie ain't dead." "What are you talking about?" "Heard it on the short wave, by God. Wouldn't kid about a thing like this. I came busting in here to tell you, only that Quisling was here, and I had to wait." "You mean it's you who owns the short-wave set downstairs?" demanded Mr. Friedlander. "I never stopped on the landing. I always ran upstairs. You see, I didn't want to know who owned the shortwave, who listened to the free radio, other side of the Rockies. Go ahead, say it. Listen to me, Mr. Friedlander. Those karate ain't here to stay. If you stop to think of it a minute, you'd understand like the rest of us." "The rest of you?" "Well, a lot of us anyway. They don't need us. We have nothing they want. They enjoy making us knuckle under is all. Something in their makeup, I don't know what. They won't stay here forever, though some of us won't be around long enough to see them go." "What's all that got to do with Freddie and the short wave?" "He's been captured, Mr. Friedlander, by the free folk. He's on their side now, the side all of us want to be on but can't be. He's alive, you understand. You wouldn't just be saying this." "You are sure? Wouldn't you trust the word of your own people, the people who saw him come down by parachute, who took him in, got his name and beamed it back here so you, his folks, wouldn't have to worry none? Well, wouldn't you?" "Yes," Mrs. Friedlander cried in a tremulous voice. "Oh, yes, sensible girl," said Mr. Davidson. Walking to the window and wiping away a circle of frost with his hand, Mr. Friedlander felt a spring in his step. He hadn't felt for 20 years since the day the karate came swooping down from space and caught the world in a tired breathing spell in World War III. Freddie was alive and safe. Freddie was free. He must tell everyone. He must shout it now to all the neighbors and shout it again at work tomorrow and withdraw his announcement from the karate newspaper and 100 other things. He lifted the warped window, with cardboard replacing 2 of the shattered panes, and breathed in the crisp, cold night air. "I'll visit the newspaper in the morning," he said. "Tell them to forget all about the announcement." He turned around and faced his wife and Mr. Davidson. "What are you crying for? Stop crying. I'm so happy, Fred. Maybe I can get down to the newspaper now and see their nightman." "Hold on there," Mr. Davidson said. "Are you crazy or something, young feller? Want to fit the noose around my neck yourself? Not just me, but all the others. Think I am the only one? There is Mr. and Mrs. Peters, and the Schwartzes, the McDonalds, the Kopaks. You are just slow catching on. That's all." "You mean they all have short waves, all those people?" "That's exactly what I mean. We have to find freedom our own way. Oh, we conform, we cry when we're supposed to and laugh. But at night we listen to the radio and learn some of the truth, so that when the karate get bored with us and decide to leave, we can take our places in a free world." Took me 2 years to build that shortwave out of spare parts, but it was worth every minute. What do you do when they come around hunting? Mr. Friedlander asked. Hide it, of course. Son, you are afraid of your own shadow. I am not. I just didn't know. For a time we were worried about you. Thought maybe you was a kissling. Now I had to take the chance. I just had to tell you. Listen, here is the thing. Here is what we'll do. We'll let the announcement stick in the paper. Got to make them think we believe. Then we'll have ourselves a real solemn funeral out to the graveyard near 92nd Street. Know a preacher who'll wring every last tear out of all of us. I mean all. We'll all go, the Kopacks, the Schwartzes, the Peters, everyone who heard in on the short wave about Freddie and how he's alive and everything. The sadder we look, the happier we'll feel later on. Then we'll have ourselves a real old-fashioned celebration, like before the karate came. Mr. McDonald says he has a bottle of real champagne he was saving for when his girl Betty got married, but I talked him into letting us use it. Son, we'll pull out all the stops, of course. You can't really get looped on an ounce or so of champagne, but we sure can try. Well, see you at the funeral. And Mr. Davidson went downstairs cackling and whistling the dirge from Beethoven's Eroica. Well, said Mr. Friedlander to his wife, what do you think? I think it's wonderful, that nice man going to all that trouble. I am not so sure. What do we know about Mr. Davidson? Maybe he's lying. Maybe he's blind. He wouldn't lie, not about a thing like that. I know how you feel. I felt that way at first, too. Free and well relaxed for the first time in so long I can't remember. But then I got to thinking, what if he's senile? What if he imagined the whole thing? It would be a sin to celebrate with Freddie dead. We could ask Mr. Peters or the others, and Freddie's not dead. That's what you want to believe. It's what I want to believe, too. Mr. Friedlander walked to the window again, where the pane was frosting over once more, giving a ghost-like quality to the street, the lamps, the facades of the other tenements, the snow-laden trees outside. He wanted to believe. But he had wanted to believe, in his youth, that the killing war would one day end. When it did, the karate had come, with talk of peace, although with their invincible weapons they had disarmed all the world's armies and, instead of rebuilding, had made a shambles of our civilization. Every day the karate told lies and told you to believe, and planted spies to see that you did, and visited you at unexpected moments to see that you conformed, and trained your children to fight against free people who, they said, were your enemies, and gave extra clothing rations to a spy, to a believer, to a man in the karate image. We can't ask the others, Mr. Friedlander said. What if Mr. Davidson was lying, or making it all up? You can't go around talking about short waves and things. It isn't safe, we have to know. Do you want to be turned in as an undesirable? Is that what you want? We already know, the karate told us. The more he spoke, the easier it was to convince himself. You couldn't live with doubt. The karate fostered doubt and taught you that. You had to avoid it. You had to know. This is so, this is not so. If this other thing may or may not be so, I don't want to talk about it. Alternative A or alternative B. Simple, concise. What did old Mr. Davidson know anyway, listening to his subversive radio? Why should the barbarians in the mountains tell the truth any more than the karate or their agents? The barbarians are our enemies. It's propaganda. Maybe Mr. Davidson is a saboteur for them. Is that clear? Mr. Friedlander demanded. Is that quite clear? Cry if you want. Freddie is dead. Freddy is dead. Dead. You can't believe all the wild stories you hear." Mrs. Friedlander was smiling at him through her tears, wiping them away, assuming again the oriental pose. "You believe what you want," she said. "We won't celebrate. We won't pretend. We'll say Freddy is dead, but I'll believe what I believe, and I am thankful to Mr. Davin. So you can live in doubt all the rest of your life. For that you are thankful. I am thankful for a crumb when I expected nothing. Where are you going?" Mr. Friedlander was buckling his worn overcoat and forcing his shoes into wet overshoes. "Out for a walk," he said. "I want to think. It's a cold night. I don't care." Outside, with the snow still falling, drifting down in unhurried silence, he found himself hating Mr. Davidson. The man should have minded his own business. The old meddler. He was a menace to the community, too. Whose side was he on, anyway? A senile old man and agent provocateur for the barbarians in the Western Mountains. Was his self-appointed mission in life to see to it that people like poor Mrs. Friedlander never knew another moment of peace all the rest of their lives. The short-wave radio. All lies. It had to be lies. If it weren't lies, you could understand nothing. Black is white, or white is black. Everyone's saying something else. You don't know. You never know. He didn't want to start any trouble. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was only a good karate, fearing citizen who knew his place. But Mr. Davidson had made a revelation to him. If all the others, if all those people Mr. Davidson had named, chuckling over each name, taking secret delight in each one as if he, the patriarch of the tenement, had converted them, one at a time or in groups, into clandestine outlaws. If all those people were subversive, thought Mr. Friedlander, why should he suffer along with them? Was it fair that he received the same inadequate food, the same squalid lodging, the same menial jobs to perform? He knew his place. But they had told him about Freddy or Mr. Davidson, their spokesman had, and he owed them something for that, for the one brief moment in which they had shoved back the snow. The grim cold winter, the bleak building, and the smell of turnips as a curtain, and revealed his own youth to him, sparkling with hope, with promise, with a life unfulfilled. No, even that had been unkind, premeditated. His lot would be all the more unpleasant for it. And Mrs. Friedlander's, they'd sealed her in a half-mourning, half-hoping future. They'd ruined her whole life. He'd have to move, of course, with his wife, but perhaps they'd earn the right to a better neighborhood. He walked up the 6 snow-covered steps to the police station, went inside, sat down, and started, telling the uniformed figure at the desk about the subversives in his building, who owned shortwave radios, starting with Mr. Davidson, and going right on down the list.
He hoped the karate would come and take them away before the funeral. End of A Cold Night for Crying by Stephen Marlowe.
The Happy Clown by Alice Eleanor Jones. This was a century of peace, plethora, and perfection, and little Stephen was a misfit, a nonconformist, who hated perfection. He had to learn the hard way. Stephen Russell was born a misfit, a nonconformist, and for the first 5 years of his life he made himself and his parents extremely unhappy. The 21st century was perfect, and this inexplicable child did not like perfection. The first trouble arose over his food. His mother did not nurse him, since the doctors had proved that baby lac and the soft rainbow-colored plastic containers in which it was warmed and offered were both a vast improvement on nature. Stephen drank the baby lac, but though it was hard to credit in so young a child, sometimes his face wore an expression of pure distaste. A little later, he rejected the baby oatsies and fruitsies and meatsies, and his large, half-focused eyes wept at the jolly pictures on the jarsies. He disliked his plastic dish made like a curled-up jolly kitten, and his spoon with the happy clown's head on the handle. He turned his face away determinedly and began to pine, reducing his mother to tears and his father to frightened anger. The doctor said cheerily, "There is nothing the matter with him. He'll eat when he gets hungry enough." And Stephen did to a degree, but not as if he enjoyed it. One day when he was nearly a year old, his mother carried his kitty corner with the dancing doxies on the pad into her bedroom, put him in it, and began to take things out of the bottom bureau drawer. They were old things, and Harriet Russell was ashamed of them. She had said more than once to her husband, Richard, only half joking, "I couldn't give them away, and I'd be ashamed for anybody to see them in our trash." They were old silver, knives and forks and spoons that looked like what they were, unadorned, and a child's plain silver dish and cup, and one small spoon with a useful curly handle. They had belonged to Harriet's great-grandmother. Once a year, Harriet took the things out and polished them and furtively put them back. This year, Stephen cried, "Ma!" stretching out his hands toward the silver and uttering a string of determined sounds which were perfectly clear to his mother. She smiled at him lovingly, but shook her head. "No, Stevie. Mumsy's precious baby doesn't want those nasty old things. No, he doesn't. Play with your happy clown, sweetheart." Stephen's face got red, and he squeezed his eyes shut, opened his mouth, and howled until his mother passed him the dish and cup and curly spoon to play with. At mealtime he would not be parted from them, and Harriet had to put away the plastic dish and spoon. Thereafter, for the sake of the container, he tolerated the thing contained, and thrived, and grew fat. Stephen did not like his rockabye crib that joggled him gently and sang him songs about the happy clown all night long, and he howled until they turned it off. He was a clean boy, and to his mother's amazement trained himself to be dry day and night by the age of 14 months, without the aid of the singing toady or the happy clown alarm. So she bought him a little folks' youth bed with a built-in joggler and happy clowns on the corners, and a television set in the footboard. It was a smaller copy of his parents' bed, even to the happy clowns. Stephen did not like that either, and if his parents persisted in turning the bed on after he had learned to turn it off, he climbed out and slept on the floor. Harriet said worriedly to her husband, "I don't know what could be the matter with him, Dickie. He's peculiar." Richard tried to comfort her. "Never mind, Harry. He'll outgrow it." Stephen did not outgrow it. When he became too big for the curly spoon and dish and cup, he demanded a knife and fork and spoon from the bureau drawer and ate his meals from the plainest dish he could find. He ate them with his back stubbornly turned to the television set, away from the morning cartoons and the noontime Kiddies Lunch Club and the evening Happy Clown. The Happy Clown had been an American institution for 30 years. He was on television for an hour every night at dinner time with puppets and movies and live singers and dancers, and his own inimitable brand of philosophy and humor. Everybody loved the Happy Clown. He had been several different actors in 30 years, but his makeup never changed. The beaming face, drawn in vivid colors, the rotund body that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelsies, and the chuckling, infectious laugh. The Happy Clown was always so cheerful and folksy and sincere. He believed passionately in all the products he instructed his viewers to buy, and one was entirely certain that he used them all himself. He gave one much more than advertising, though some of his nightly gems of wisdom, he called them nuggets, were really wonderful. They made one think. A favorite nugget which people were always writing in and asking him to repeat went like this: "We're all alike inside, folks, and we ought to be all alike outside." The Happy Clown's viewers were not children and adults, they were kiddies and folks. After the Happy Clown went off the air, the happy kiddies went to bed, to lie for a while looking at the jolly kitten and the dancing dogsy until, lulled by the juggler, they went gently to sleep. After that came the cowboys and spacemen. Carryovers for any happy kiddies with insomnia. For really meaty programs, one had to stay up past 10. Then the spectaculars began, and the quiz shows, and the boxing and wrestling. Stephen did not like the Happy Clown or the Jolly Kitten or the Dancing Dogsy. Sometimes he began to grow interested in the cowboys or spacemen. But when they stopped in the middle of an adventure to talk about how they could not possibly rope the steers or shoot the asteroids without a good breakfast of cornseeds and choco milko, which everybody ate. Just everybody. Stephen climbed out of bed and slept on the floor. Stephen did not like the records or the talking books, and when he went to Kitty Garden, he viewed the televised lessons with a cold eye. For some reason which he could not have explained, he wanted to learn to read, but they would not teach him till he was 7, and so he taught himself from the letters on the jarsies. But then there was nothing to read except the newspapers and the magazines, which he puzzled over patiently, getting most of the words right after a while. The many advertisements were easiest. They used pictures and the simplest of language. His parents thought it was very cunning of him to look at the printing like that, so wisely, as if he could read it. He said once to Harriet, "I can read it." But she said, "Oh, Stevie, you are teasing Mumsy," and looked so frightened at this fresh peculiarity that the child said gravely, "Yes, teasing." He wished he had a silent book. He knew there were such things. But there were none at home. There were few silent books anywhere. There were none in Kitty Garden. Stephen was not happy in Kitty Garden. The enthusiasm the other kiddies showed for the lessons appalled him. The kiddies themselves appalled him. They joined so passionately in the group play, clutching each other with their hot, moist hands, panting and grinning into each other's faces. They were always clutching and panting and grinning, in large, noisy groups, with large community smiles. They confused him. He could not tell them apart. Stephen retired to a corner and turned his back, and when they clutched and panted and grinned at him, he hit them. The Kitty Garden monitor had to report of him to his unhappy parents that he was uncooperative and antisocial. He would not merge with the group. He would not acquire the proper attitudes for successful community living. He would not adjust. Most shocking of all, when the lesson about the birdsies and beesies was telecast, he not only refused to participate in the ensuing period of group experimentation, but lost color and disgraced himself by being sick in his corner. It was a painful interview. At the end of it, the monitor recommended the clinic. Richard appreciated her delicacy. The clinic would be less expensive than private psychiatry. And, after all, the manager of a supermarket was no millionaire. Harriet said to Richard when they were alone, "Dickie, he isn't outgrowing it. He's getting worse. What are we going to do?" It was a special tragedy, since Harriet was unable to have any more kitties. And if this one turned out wrong, Richard said firmly, "We'll take him to the clinic. They'll know what to do." The first thing they did to Stephen was to talk to him. The psychiatrist made him lie down on a foam rubber couch, Kitty's model, with a happy clown motif on the slipcover, and said with a beaming face, "Now, Stevie, what seems to be the trouble?" The boy turned his head away from the psychiatrist's shining teeth and said, "My name's not Stevie, it's Stephen." He was a thin little boy, rather undersized. The baby fat had melted away fast when he began to be exposed to Kitty Garden. He had dark hair and big eyes, and an uncommonly precise way of speaking for a child of 5. The psychiatrist said, "Oh, but we're going to be friends, Stevie, and friends always use nicknames, don't they?" My name's William, but everybody calls me Willie. You can call me Uncle Willie. The boy said politely, I'd rather not, please. The doctor was undismayed. I want to help you. You believe that, don't you, Stevie? The child said, Stephen, do I have to lie down? The doctor said agreeably. It's more usual to lie down, but you may sit up if you want to. Why don't you like kitty gardens, Stephen? The boy sat up and regarded him warily. The doctor had a kind face, a really kind face, in spite of all those shining teeth. And Stephen was only 5 years old, after all, and there was nobody to talk to, and he was desperately unhappy. Perhaps, he said, you'll tell them. The doctor shook his head. Nothing goes farther than this room. Stephen. The child leaned forward, pressing his knees together, hugging himself with his arms, bowing his head. His position was almost futile. He said, I am never by myself. They never let me be by myself. The psychiatrist said reasonably, but nobody can live by himself, Stevie. He had apparently forgotten Stephen, and the boy did not correct him again. You have to learn to live with other people, to work and play with them, to know them, and the only way you can learn is by being with them. When you can't be with them personally, there is always television. That's how you learn, Stevie. You can't be by yourself. The boy looked up and said starkly, Never. The gleaming teeth showed. But why should you want to? Stephen said, I don't know. The doctor said slowly and with emphasis, Stevie, long before you were born, the world was a very bad place. There were wars all the time. Do you know why? The boy shook his head. It was because people were different from each other and didn't understand each other and didn't know each other. They had to learn how to be alike and understand and know so that they would be able to live together. They learned in many ways. Stevie, one way was by visiting each other. You've heard about the visitors who come from. Stephen said, You mean the happy tours? Yes. When you are 12 years old, you can go on a happy tour. Won't that be fun? Stephen said, If I could go alone. The doctor looked at him sharply. But you can't. Try to understand. Stevie, you can't. Now tell me, why don't you like to be with other people? Stephen said. All the time. Not all the time, the doctor repeated patiently. Why? Stephen looked at the doctor and said, A very strange thing. They touch me. He seemed to shrink into himself, not just with their hands. The doctor shook his head sadly. Of course they do. That's just... Well, maybe you are too young to understand. The interview went on for quite a while, and at the end of it, Stephen was given a series of tests which took a week. The psychiatrist had not told the truth. What the boy said during the first interview and all the tests was fully recorded on concealed machines. The complete transcript made a fat dossier in the office of the clinic director. At the end of the test, the director said seriously to Stephen's parents, I'll be frank with you. You have a brilliant kitty here. Right now he has the intelligence of a 12-year-old, but brilliance has to be channeled in the right direction just now. Well, frankly, it's channeled in the wrong direction. We'll give it a year or so, and then if things don't clear up, I am afraid we'll have to correct him. Richard said through dry lips. You mean a stainer? The director nodded. The only thing. Harriet shuddered and began to cry. But there has never been anything like that in our family. The disgrace. Oh, Dickie, it would kill me, the director said kindly. There is no disgrace, Mrs. Russell. That's a mistaken idea many people have. These things happen occasionally, nobody knows why. And there is absolutely no disgrace in a stainer. Nothing is altered but the personality, and afterward you have a happy, normal kitty who hardly remembers that anything was ever wrong with him. Naturally, nobody ever mentions it, but there is no hurry. In the case of a kitty, we can wait a while. Bring Stevie in once a week. We'll try therapy first. Being, as the director had said, a brilliant kitty, Stephen soon understood much of what was kept from him. It did not take him long to learn what was making his dadsy look stern and white, and what was making his mumsy cry. He loved his parents, and did not want them to be unhappy. And he certainly did not want to have his head cut open. And so, he began to act. Even at 5, Stephen discovered in himself a fine talent for acting. He began to conform, to adjust, to merge. He became social and cooperative and acquired the proper attitudes for successful community living. He gave up the old silver voluntarily. He accepted the used bed. He looked at the happy clown. And he did much better in Kitty Garden. He even joined in the group experimentation and was not sick anymore, though he could not keep himself from losing color. They were pleased with him at the clinic and after a few months discharged him. By the time Stephen was 12 and had made the happy tour and joined the Happy Scouts and had a happy affair involving experimentation with a neighbor's daughter, Harriet and Richard ceased to worry about him. If sometimes he felt so tightly strung up that a storm of tears was his only relief, he kept the tears quiet. He was graduated from high school at 16 and from college at 20. Having read all he could of the silent books in the scant high school library and the more ample university one, and having wisely elected to appear more stupid than he was. Even his IQ was now judged to be only slightly above normal. He left college with honors, popularity, and a reputation as an actor. He took the lead in all the dramatic club plays, having particular success in the reproduction of a Happy Clown program. Stephen, of course, was the happy clown. He enrolled at once in the New York School of Television Arts, and his mother cried when he left home to live in the school dormitory. Stephen did well at television arts, soon taking more leads than was customary in school productions, which were organized on a strictly repertory basis. He did not stay to graduate, being snatched away in his first year by a talent scout for a popular daytime serial, The Happy Life, The Happy Life, recounted the trials of a young physician too beautiful for his own good, who became involved in endless romantic complications. Stephen was given the lead, the preceding actor having moved up to a job as understudy for the Jolly Kitten, and was an immediate success. For one thing, he looked the part. He was singularly handsome, in a lean, dark-browed way, and did not need flattering makeup or special camera angles. He had a deep, vibrant voice and perfect timing. He could say, "Darling, this is tearing me to pieces," with precisely the right intonation, and let tears come into his magnificent eyes, and make his jaw muscles jump appealingly, and hold the pose easily for the 5 minutes between the 10-minute pitch for Marquis cigarettes, which constituted one episode, The Happy Life. His fan mail's prodigious. If Stephen had moments of bewilderment, of self-loathing, of despair, when the tears were real and the jaw muscles jumped to keep the mouth from screaming, no one in the happy young men's dormitory where he slept ever knew it. He managed his life well enough. He had a few affairs with girls, it was expected of one, and he did not have to work very hard at it since they always threw themselves at him. And he got along well with other young men, who forgave him for being so handsome, because he did not work at it except on camera, but he was lonely. Surrounded by people intruded and trespassed upon, continually touched in ways other than physical, he was yet lonely. During his life he had met a few other nonconformists, shy, like him, wary of revealing themselves, but something always seemed to happen to them. Some were miserable being nonconformists and asked pitifully for the stainer. Some were detected as Stephen had been, and some were unfortunately surprised in hospitals. Under the anesthetic, they sometimes taught, and then, if they were adults, they were immediately corrected by means of Steiner's lobotomy. It had been learned that adults did not respond to therapy. There was never any organization, any underground of misfits. An underground presupposes injustice to be fought, cruelty to be resisted, and there was no injustice and no cruelty. The mass of people were kind, and their leaders duly and fairly elected were kind. They all sincerely believed in the gospel of efficiency and conformity and kindness. It had made the world a wonderful place to live in, full of wonderful things to make and buy and consume, all wonderfully advertised. And if one were a misfit and the doctors found it out and gave one a Steiner, it was only to make one happy, so that one could appreciate what a wonderful world it was. Stephen met no nonconformists at the School of Television Arts, and none while he was acting in The Happy Life, until Denise Cotterell joined the cast. Denise, old Denny, of course, was a pleasantly plain young woman with a whimsical face which photographed pretty and remarkable dark blue eyes. It was her eyes which first made Stephen wonder. They mirrored his own hope and longing and the desperate loneliness of the exile. For 2 months they were together as often as they could be, talking intellectual treason in public under cover of conventional faces, and talking intellectual treason in private with excitement and laughter and sometimes tears, falling in love. They planned, after much discussion, to be married and to bring up a dozen clever rebel children, Denise said soberly. They'd better be clever, because they'll have to learn to hide. They made love in Denise's apartment when her roommate Polly, was out, as awkwardly as if there had never been any group experimentation or happy affairs. Denise said wonderingly, "When you really love someone, it's all new. Isn't that strange?" And Stephen said, kissing her, "No, not strange at all." He took her to meet his family. Denise's family lived 3,000 miles away, and she behaved with such perfect decorum and charm that Richard and Harriet were delighted and as eager as Stephen for the wedding. Stephen had agreed reluctantly to put it off until Denise had a chance to introduce him to her parents. They were coming east at Christmas. She laughed over it and said, "I am being terribly conventional, darling, but that's one convention I like." While they waited, Stephen's agent secured a really unprecedented opportunity for so young and relatively untried an actor. The current happy clown was unhappily retiring by reason of age and infirmity, and Stephen's agent arranged a tryout for the part. He said, "Give it all you got, kid. It's the chance of the century." Stephen said, "Sure, Joey," and allowed his sensitive face to register all the proper emotions. Actually, his emotions were, in the vernacular of a previous century, mixed. He loathed the whole concept of the happy clown. But there was money in it, and Stephen was not rebel enough to despise money. With money, he could retire early, go away somewhere with Denise, to some country place where they could be relatively free of pressure. Over staggering competition, he got the part. He called Denise up at once from a booth at the studio to tell her. Polly answered the phone, looking pale and frightened over the viewer, and said rapidly, "Oh, Stevie, I've been trying to get you for an hour. Denny's sick. They took her to the hospital." Stephen sat back against the hard wall of the booth, feeling cold. The receiver slack in his hand, he said, "What's the matter with her? Which hospital?" "Appendicitis." "Happy hour." Polly began to cry. "Oh, Stevie, I feel so. I'll go right over." He cut her off abruptly and went. The doctors caught Denise's appendix in time to avoid the necessary but rarely fatal complications. But under the anesthetic she talked, revealing enough about her opinion of television, and the happy clown cult, and the state of society in general, to cause her doctors to raise their eyebrows pityingly and perform the stainer at once, while Stephen sat unknowing in the waiting room, smoking a full pack of Marquis cigarettes. The thing was done. At last the doctor came out to him and said what was always said in such cases. It was necessary to do something, you understand? No mention. And for a moment Stephen felt so ill that he was grateful for the little ampoule the doctor broke and held under his nose. They always carried those when they had to give news of a stainer to relatives or sweethearts or friends. The doctor said, "All right now." "Good. You'll be careful, of course. She may be conscious for a minute. There is no harm in it yet. She won't move or touch the—" Stephen said, "I'll be careful." He was still feeling ill when they let him in to see Denise. He sat down beside her bed and spoke to her urgently. "Denise, talk to me, please, Denise." She opened her eyes, looked at him drowsily, and smiled. "Oh, Stevie, I am so glad you came." "I've been wanting you, darling," Stephen said. "Denise," she frowned. "Why do you call me that? Call me Denny. Did you get the part, darling?" He drew back a little. "Yes, I got it." She gave him a radiant smile. "That's wonderful. I am so proud of you, Stevie." She slept again. That night in the AHEM dormitory, Stephen did not sleep. He lay quiet, tense, hoping for the relief of tears, but it did not come. Stephen went to see Denise every day, though after the first time she was not awake to know him. The doctors were keeping her under sedation until the head bandage could be removed. So far as Denise was to know, she had gone to the hospital simply for a rather protracted appendectomy. Looking at her, Stephen knew that he could never leave her. He had loved her completely. He would love her now with as much of himself as she would need or understand. For a while he waited to be kindly questioned, to be thoroughly examined, to be tenderly given the shot in the arm and to awake like her, but nobody came. Denise had apparently said nothing about him. Some censor or other, perhaps it was the censor of love, had kept her from even saying his name. For a while, Stephen considered confessing to somebody that he was an unacceptable member of society. Then they would make him like Denise. He shuddered. Did he really want to be like Denise? Some stubborn pride in him refused it. When Denise left the hospital for the hotel where she would stay until the wedding, Stephen was more gentle with her than ever, kinder and more loving. He made her very happy. He made love to her again, and it was like loving a ghost. No, it was like loving a fine, beautiful body without the ghost, without the spirit. He returned to the AM to lie sleepless amid the breathings and mutterings of the other young men, turning restlessly in his bed, feeling oppressed, tormented, strung on wires. He rehearsed feverishly for the part of the happy clown, and because he was a fine craftsman and a conscientious artist, he continued to give it all he had. The sponsors were pleased. A week before Christmas, the current, happy clown, retired and hobbled off to a nursing home. There was no fanfare. The public was not to realize that the happy clown was mortal, and Stephen took over with no visible change. For 5 days he played the part to perfection. On the 6th day, he performed as usual, perhaps a little better. His commercials had a special fervor, and the sponsors exchanged happy glances. Denise was sitting in the booth with them. She smiled at Stephen lovingly through the glass. Stephen was running a little fast tonight. The engineer made stretching motions with his hands to slow him down, but he used up all his material, even the nugget, with 3 minutes to spare. Then he said, "All right, folks, now I have a special treat for you," and moved quickly to the center mic. Before the sponsors, or the engineers, or the studio audience, or anybody in the whole American nation knew what was happening, He began rapidly to talk. He said, "Are you all happy? You are, aren't you? Everybody's happy because you are all sheep. All sheep in a nice, safe pasture, all alike. You eat alike and dress alike and think alike. If any of you has an original thought, you'd better suppress it, or they'll cut it out of you with a knife." He leaned forward and made a horrible face at the camera. Under the jolly makeup and the artful padding, his mouth was shockingly twisted, and tears were running out of his eyes. "A long, sharp knife, folks!" He paused momentarily to recover his voice, which had begun to shake. "Go on being happy. Go on being sheep. Wear the clothesies and eat the foodsies and don't dare think. Me, I'd rather be dead and damned and in hell." Fortunately, nobody heard the last 3 sentences. The paralyzed engineer had recovered in time to cut him off during the pause, and had signaled the stagehand to draw the curtain and the sound man to play "The Happy Clown" sign-off record loud. Stephen finished himself thoroughly, however, by repeating the same sentiments, with some others he happened to think of, to Denise and the sponsors, when they all came pouring out of the booth. Then he collapsed. Savin Stainer was a complete success. He recovered from it a subdued, agreeable, and thoroughly conventional young man who had the impression that he had suffered a nervous breakdown. He was discharged from the happy hour at the end of January, innocently leaving behind him the broken hearts of 3 nurses and 1 female physician, and went home to his parents. During his convalescence, they were patient with him and passionately kind. In spite of the disgrace they felt, a disgrace that would never be mentioned, they loved him even better than before, because now he was irrevocably like them. Denise was lost to him. The outburst in the studio, and the Stainer, and the loss of the happy clown part were cumulatively too much for her. She broke the engagement and was heard to say that Stevie Russell had proved himself an absolute fool. He was miserable over it, though he had only a hazy idea of what he had done or why Denny should suddenly be so unkind to him. The happy clown incident had passed off well. Immediately after it occurred, a powerful battery of comedians, including the Jolly Kitten and the Dancing Dogsy, forgetting rivalries to rally round in a crisis, went on the air to ensure that it passed off well. They made certain that every viewer should regard the whole thing as a tremendously funny, if rather mystifying, joke. The viewers fell in with this opinion easily, and laughed about the sheep joke a good deal, admiring the happy clown's sense of humor, a little sharp to be sure. Not so folksy and down-to-earth as usual, but the happy clown could do no wrong. They said to each other, "He laughed till he cried, did you notice? So did I." For a while, teenagers addressed each other as, "Hi, sheep." Girls were, "Hi, lamb." And a novelty company in Des Moines made a quick killing with scatterpins fashioned like sheep and/or lambs. But around the studios, Stephen was dead, Stainer or no Stainer, and of course that part of it was never openly discussed. Sponsors had long memories, and the consensus seemed to be that it was best to let sleeping sheep lie. Stephen did not care. He no longer had any particular desire to be an actor. Stephen went to work in his father's supermarket and was happy among the shelves of oatsies and cornsies and gelsies. He got over Denise after a while and met a girl named Frances, Franny, whom he loved and who loved him. They were married in the summer and had a little house with as much furniture in it as they could afford. The first thing they bought was a television set. After all, as Stevie said, he would not want to miss The Happy Clown. End of The Happy Clown by Alice Eleanor Jones.
The Last Trespasser by Jim Harmon. Worlds of If Science Fiction, July 1960.
There was nothing wrong with him that a writer could not cure. And the rougher the better. They would not believe Marlowe was alone in there in the padded cell. That made it worse. Marlowe was in his month for lying on his stomach to avoid bed sores. He was walking from Peoria, Illinois to Detroit, Michigan, currently, and he had just reached Chicago. It was fine to see State Street again, and the jewelry stores stuck in the alcoves of churches with the handsomely barred windows. A man in army surplus, green with an old library book, was asking for car fare to a hiring hall when they began opening the door. Marlowe rolled over on one elbow. It was peculiar. They hadn't done that for 3 years. 2 of them came inside, thick men with disinterested faces. "Try no sudden moves," one of them advised him. "We will anticipate you," the other one added. Marlowe went through the unfamiliar process of standing up. He looked at 2 men. "I wouldn't try anything against the 4 of you." "I am not that crazy time for an interrogation, Marlowe," the orderly said. "Come with us." Marlowe fell in between them and left the padded cell, frowning. "What kind of an interrogation?" he asked them. "What other kind?" one countered, a sanity hearing. He felt his eyebrows jerk. His sanity, he thought, that had been established long ago. Or his lack of it, Marlowe remembered the doctor. He hadn't had much else to do for several years. He was Dr. Harrison, a graying man with starched face and collar. But the younger man, sitting with Harrison behind the broad, translucent desk, was a stranger to Marlowe. He seemed to be a comic strip drawing, all in straight lines. "Yes, sir." "Step forward, Michael," Harrison said. Marlowe stepped forward. It had been a long time since he had been allowed to travel so far. "Now, relax, Michael," the doctor continued, leaning forward and grinning hideously. "All you have to do is tell me the truth." "No, I don't." "Doctor, I am under no compulsion to tell you the truth. I am perfectly capable of lying, if it would do me any good." "Hush that, Michael. You must not try to make believe you can lie. I know you tell me only the truth." "All right," Marlowe said, exhaling deeply. "Believe that I speak only the truth if you like. But remember, I just told you that I am a liar, and that must be true." Harrison blinked in watery confusion. He was obviously senile. Only the old man's rider kept him from coming apart at his mental seams. The angle-faced man spoke into Harrison's ear. The old doctor continued to blink for a moment, then faced Marlowe, the lines of his face drawn into an asterisk. "What? You mean to tell me that you don't have an inner voice that urges you to tell the truth at all times?" "No," Marlowe explained. "I do not hear voices." "You don't?" "Never." "And there is no inner sense that tells you when somebody is plotting against you?" "Absolutely not." "And when you are in trouble or danger, there is nothing that allows you to somehow look into the future, or read minds, or see through walls?" "I can't do any of those things," Marlowe stated. Harrison threw up his hands. "Complete withdrawal from reality. Pathological. Why is he here anyway?" The younger man grasped the withered, thin upper arm and whispered audibly but not understandably. Harrison's face eventually quivered back in line with Marlowe's. "Michael, do you know what year this is?" the doctor asked. Marlowe thought about that one. He wasn't absolutely certain, but he made some rapid calculations. 1978. 1979. "And what has been the single most important development in human history in recent times?" Marlowe sighed. He knew what he was expected to say. The coming of the riders. And what are riders? "Riders," Marlowe recited patiently, "are elements of a symbiotic life form. They have united with human beings to make one symbiotic creature. They have given much more than they have taken. All prominent religions recognize that they do not interfere with human free will. They have made us healthier, virtually immortal, and near supermen. The human race now is so much Zoa, and every man is a Zune. Every man but me, damn it. I don't have any rider. I am not a Superman, and I cannot get away with pretending to be one. Erson oscillated his head. Michael, your case isn't unique. There are others who claim that they have no riders, usually maintaining that they are naturally superhuman and need no help from some funny kind of foreigner. They are tolerated the same way. That Briar. We tolerated people who claimed they possessed psychic auras, or who got up in cathedrals and yelled that they had no souls. But you, Michael, are a troublemaker. You've been rude, vulgar, and reckless with your life, and others in your pretense to be riderless. Your pathological retreat from reality leaves us with no choice but to. The other man behind the desk shoved a paper in front of Erson and tapped it forcefully with an index finger. Erson read the paper, and his eyebrows went askew. Yes. We have discovered that there is a basic difference between you and the others who maintain they have no riders. It would seem it has been established that you really do not have a rider. Remarkable? Yes. Well, I have no alternative but to dismiss you from this institution, Michael Malloy, and to extend to you my personal apology for any inconvenience your 3.5 years' detainment may have caused you. A trick, Malloy thought. Only what point would there be in tricking him? The oppressive horror of it crushed down upon him with its full weight. Oh, no, he said. No. Sir, take me back to my padded cell. I've got my rights. I am not going out there again. Maybe I could have learned to live with it once, but not now. I can't face up to living with a world of supermen, people who can do everything better than I can. Take me back. I think I am going to get violent any minute now. He took a swing at the nearest guard, but naturally the guard's rider told him what was coming, and he dodged deftly, caught Malloy's arm and twisted it into half Nelson to hold him completely, infuriatingly helpless. Malloy had to hold back tears of frustration. Fortunately, Dr. Hirson croaked, you can do no harm even if you do get violent, and I am sure everyone will want to do everything possible for a poor unfortunate like yourself. We all will make allowances. No, Malloy announced with the rhythm of his stomping feet. I won't leave here. I won't. The man beside Erson favored Malloy with a smile. Malloy wasn't sure whether it was friendly or mocking. The stranger nodded his head briefly to the guards. Malloy was dragged, protesting, down the marble-floored hallway to the entrance of the mental hospital. His anguished cries echoed across the ornate ceiling of the old building. He was shoved out the front door with a parcel and brown paper under his arms. Malloy made one desperate attempt to get back inside, but the massive door clanged in his face, and he could hear the reverberations dying away inside and the steady retreat of footsteps. Malloy turned away in pain from the unaccustomed brilliance and warmth of the sun and banged on the door with his fists and demanded to be readmitted. He grew hoarser and hoarser, and he slid further and further down until he was squatting on the threshold. His cheek rested against the warm, varnished surface of the door. Malloy had never been an overly proud or vain man before the riders had come. After all, he'd had one of the most menial jobs on earth. He had been a magazine editor. But now he felt squashed under the thumb of humiliation, the monstrous indignity of it all, to be thrown out of an asylum. After a time, Malloy felt a coolness, a wetness on his head. He dreamed a little dream to himself that he knew was a dream. They were coming to wrap him in warm sheets again, but it was only a dream. This wetness wasn't warm. It was chilly. He finally identified it from his memories. This was Rein. He stirred himself and gathered up the brown bundle that he knew must contain his suit, papers, and a little money. Malloy trudged down the road toward the town that lay below the sanitarium. His collar turned up, he found he didn't mind the rain so much. It tended to settle the dust, and the walk would be a long one. Grainson Amory, the iron-haired publisher, greeted Malloy with a firm, warm, dry handshake. "Michael, it's certainly good to see you again. You are looking well." "Yes, the bruises left by the straight-jacket straps don't show," said Malloy. "A unique miscarriage of justice," Amory said. "I certainly hope it's unique. I hope there aren't any more poor devils like me locked away." Amory offered Malloy a chair with a broad, well-manicured hand. "I am confident that there aren't. And you are out now, fortunately." "You can call it fortune if you like," Malloy said uneasily. "But you are glad to be out." Malloy hesitated. "I am resigned to it." The flow of time washed some of the salt out of the wound. "Being born is definitely a traumatic experience. How well I remember," Amory said. Malloy glanced at him sharply, then eased back in his chair. Of course, like everybody else, thanks to his rider, Amory had total recall. Malloy couldn't even remember his first birthday party. "Is there any way I can be of help to you, Michael?" Amory went on. "Sure, I want my job back." Amory's forehead squeezed into lines of distress. "Yes, I was made aware of that. But, Michael, there have been a lot of changes in the publishing business since you were with us. For instance, it would be difficult for you to proofread a manuscript today. I am hardly the type who can't spell. I haven't forgotten that. I know, Michael, but here, have a look at this." Amory handed over a sheet of paper. Malloy glanced at it. It seemed a typical sheet of a writer's manuscript, though a horrible yellowish gray that made the typescript from the tatters of a ribbon almost illegible. It was also smudged with jelly donut fingerprints, and there were several holes burned in it by droppings of cigarette ash. Pretty sloppy, but things didn't seem to have changed much. Not until he read the paper. Cynthia walked toward him. Number, jauntily. Hi, she. Number called. Out. To him. Hello. Sweet stuff. He. Purse aid. Trying to number sound. Number. Gay. Malloy looked up blankly. "What are all the cockeyed punctuation marks doing in there?" he asked. Amory exhaled Havana smoke expansively. "That's the way things are now, Michael. Those punctuation marks indicate whether the protagonist's thoughts are self-directed or writer-directed, or a combination of both, and which is dominant at the time, human or writer. They became absolutely essential with the coming of the writers." Malloy covered his lips with his fingers. "Of course, I don't understand this punctuation now, but I could learn it quickly enough." The publisher shook his massive head. "No, you couldn't learn it. You don't have a writer. You could never understand all the little subtleties. I could fake it. Never. It might get past the average reader, but the author and critics would know right away. All an editor can do is watch for typographical errors and change them the way the author wanted them, if his fingers hadn't tripped over the wrong keys. As it was, we used to get a good many complaints from writers about you making changes in their work. Grammar," Malloy explained. "I got kind of a bug about grammar. I used to fix up manuscripts some." Rubbing out his fat cigar, Amory leaned across his desk. "This isn't like the good old days when I started out, Mike. If I had my way today, I'd get the National Guard ordered out and have those miserable slobs grind out stories with a bayonet at their backs." The red gleam dimmed in Amory's eyes. "Those were the days, by God. Back then you didn't edit manuscripts with any dinky little blue pencil. You used a razor blade and a grease stick." Amory slumped down in his swivel, his eyes now only embers. "But that day is over, Mike. Writers have their rights, damn them. You get the wrong punctuation in one of their private eye epics. Mike. And one of them will slap a suit against the company for defacing a work of art, and both of us could land in jail. Westerns, Marlowe suggested in desperation. Historical fiction. They can't employ the new punctuation. I could edit them. The veteran publisher shook his head again. No. Cowboys and westerns today turn your stomach more than ever with their damn nobility and purity. Heroines in historical novels act just as if deodorants and living bra had been in use back then. And these stories are written as if the characters did have riders, with only a few minor concessions. Okay. Marlowe stood up. I'll go quietly. Maybe you were lucky, Mike, Amory said up at him. I remember old-fashioned ideals like privacy and free will and free enterprise. They don't exist anymore. You can't tell me that my free will hasn't been affected. Why, every business deal I've had since the coming has been strictly ethical. You know that isn't like me. No, Marlowe admitted thoughtfully. I am even so ethical now that I recognize I owe you something. I know money can't repay. Hell, it can't, Marlowe said quickly. The publisher stripped off a sheaf of bills with deliberation. Marlowe pocketed them enough to keep him eating for a couple of months. After that, there was always the Salvation Army. He didn't have anything to worry about, really. Amory, what would you do if you were in my place? He heard himself ask suddenly. Amory steepled his fingers. I hesitate to suggest a deception to anyone, but since you ask me what I would do if I didn't have a rider, I will tell you the truth. I would pretend that I did not have a rider. What are you talking about? I don't have a rider so far as I myself personally know. I am the only person in the whole damned world that doesn't have one. I'd like to find out why, but I am no scientist. So I just have to live with it, or without it. There is a very, very fine difference. Amory pointed out with one finger. Semantics is no longer a living science since the coming, but I'll try to make myself clear. You must pretend, to have to pretend, that you don't have a rider. Join the jockey set. Jockey set, Marlowe mumbled, massaging the back of his neck. I've been put away for 3.5 years. What's the jockey set? Jockeys are characters who pretend that they don't have riders, that they are self-sufficient human beings. Sometimes they use their rider's powers and claim to be natural supermen. Sometimes they leave rider power untapped and pretend to be natural, old-type human beings. But they are all fakes. The rider in them comes out sooner or later. But if they have riders, will I be able to fool them into thinking I am only pretending to be without one? Amory lifted his shoulders and drew down the corners of his mouth. Who knows? I will tell you this, though you must be pretty much of a blank to a rider. If they won't touch you, it must mean they can't. Marlowe started to ask him how he knew what riders felt about him, then thought better of it. How would I fake trying to hide the fact that I didn't have a rider, I suppose? Maybe by slipping up and letting myself predict the future or something. That's it, Amory beamed. You see, it will be easy. Of course, Marlowe said dully. I mean, that is to say, anytime you don't do something and don't do it particularly well, the jockeys will only admire your splendid act. Marlowe nodded thoughtfully. He turned and shook hands with the publisher. Well, Amory, thanks for the money and the advice. You always were the most devious master of deceit I ever knew. Thank you, Amory said with great sincerity. There's one more thing. This may sound silly, but they found me out pretty quick after it happened. What does a rider look like? Where do they come from? Where do they fasten onto the brain or body of human beings? Amory leaned across the desk and backhanded Marlowe in the mouth. Get out, Amory said. Malloy left the office, holding a handkerchief to his cut lip. It was a dump. The name had changed a half-dozen times over the last half-century, but the spots in the tablecloths remained the same. The dump had seen the lost generation, the beat generation, and now the ridden generation only. Malloy supposed they called themselves the riderless generation. Well, maybe they were. Maybe they were like him. He walked in hanging on to that thought, his stride long. He cut down his stride. At that rate, he would be out in the alley soon. Self-consciously, Malloy slid into a chair at a vacant table so he wouldn't draw undue attention. As he began idly tracing the grease spots on the tablecloths, that looked like the wrappers from a line of cereal boxes, all red and white checks, he discovered every shaved head in the room was triangulating him. He shifted uncomfortably. He was playing in middle of the road. He had a close crew cut and wore a plaid flannel shirt and purple velvet ballet leotards. Maybe he was too far on the conservative side for here. "Spell it, saddle," the counterman called to him without coming front. "Cola," he ordered. "With chicory pecans and honey. 1 sou Easter on the path," the counterman called out tiredly. "With you are going to sit there, eh?" A liquid female voice flowed into his ear. "With I am doing it, she," Malloy said, not turning. She eased around in front of the table. She was red-haired and built, wearing black leotards and a coat of black enamel. "Your pupils are going to wear me away," the redhead said. "I've only got eyes. How else can I read you?" "That is truth. True, you thee." The counterman set out Malloy's drink. "It's waiting for you, saddle. Don't tease it or it'll bite." He went for the cola and brought it to the table. "You came back?" she said. He pulled up his chair. "I always come back. You can risk money on it. Saddle up. Saddle before the post my touchstone." The girl sat down. Her green eyes were moving, always moving, but mostly over Malloy, his chair, the table. "You going to keep possession here long?" "I don't know any reason why not," said Malloy. "Of course you don't," she snapped. "Only they close at 5. The billboard gives it 24 hours a day. They trim a little off at 5 to sweep the floors and change the table shrouds. Change 'em from one table to another," Malloy jibed. "You formed it. Clean ones in front, dirty ones in the shadows. Let's try breathing air," she suggested. "Wait till we gate up. I've got pecans to drink." The counterman's hawking laugh filled the room. "Let him wait, Mandy. I might as well wait till later to sweep it in." Her face caught fire for an instant. The Board of Health don't go away just because you can read their dirty minds. "So take him out," the counterman snarled. Malloy suddenly decided he had played hard to get long enough. This was his first chance to get in with the jockeys. From what he had heard, they had some kind of underground set up to help their own in business and the arts. He needed that help. "Let's lope," he said, pushing his chair back and leaving silver on the table for the drink and a tip. He touched the girl's lacquered arm and steered her toward the door. Behind him, the floor fell in. Ripping, tearing, rendering, splintering, crashing, crushing, reverberating, bedlam. Of course, it couldn't have been the floor caving in, Malloy thought, as he turned to see a great hole where the floor had disappeared. The hole was where the table and chair he had been using had stood a moment before. Flapping at the sides of the cave and were innumerable thicknesses of linoleum, and between each one, an incredible accumulation of filth and debris. O. Henry candy bar wrappers, a cover from a Collier's, a booklet on the new Packard. Ask the man who owns one. A newspaper article on Flo Ziegfeld's girls. Stop thinking in slogans. But mostly just dirt, dust, webs, lint, filth. There had been no boards under the table. The ends of the exposed boards weren't freshly broken, but old and rotted, porously smooth. Only the linoleum and the dirt had supported the table for years. Marlowe edged closer and saw some broken sticks lying on a jagged pile of coke, standing out black in the darkness far below. The redhead pulled him back from the edge, her fingers digging into his biceps, writhing with a strange, passionate intensity, as if she were trying to knead him into a layer for a pie. With you are a real jockey. He a real jockey. A real one truth. I'm going to take you to the commissioner. He the commissioner in his saddle. Somehow, uncertain, yet surely, Marlowe was dimly pleased at this. Don't say it, the fat man remarked, glancing up for an instant, then lowering his eyes to the display of papers on his desk. No esoteric jargon, please, all right, Marlowe said readily. Shall I sit down? By all means. Saddle up. A second chin trembled. Damn it. There I go. Have a chair. Marlowe took the only chair not piled down with books, or maps, or correspondence, or manuscripts, or notes. It had a straight back and a plastic seat, piously uncomfortable. The big man looked up a second time and folded rows of pink sausages complacently. So, you want to be a jockey, eh? Marlowe thinned his lips and licked the insides of them, making a snap judgment. Not really. I don't have a rider, and I want what help the jockeys can give me. I am not particularly anxious to acquire introverted slang and a shaved head, but if that goes along with the help. He spread his hands eloquently. So you don't think you have a rider? Marlowe didn't know how to answer that. I don't think I have a rider, he repeated without inflection. I don't think I have a rider either, only I know I do, the fat man said. Marlowe stood up elaborately. You dirty steed. Oh, sit down, Marlowe. Sit down. I'm a jockey like the rest of you. There's only one difference. I know I am sick. I've got a rider and all its powers, but I could no more use them than an acrophobie could climb a ladder up the Empire State to get at a naked princess sitting on a bag of gold. Marlowe eased back down onto the chair and shook his head slowly. That would be a hell of a way to be. The big man slammed down 2 hams made out of fists. You are exactly the same way, sonny boy, only you don't know any better. Marlowe swallowed. The man, known as the commissioner, might be right at that. Have it your way, Marlowe said, but I sure think I don't have a rider. The commissioner smirked. Marlowe knew what that meant. He knew men like the fat boy. He understood them. He had had Grayson, Amory, Dr. Ayerson. He knew the breed. What are you holding back on me? Marlowe demanded. Marlowe, do you even know what a rider is? Marlowe paused. Then, no, I don't. I thought not. Shall I tell you? I imagine you were planning to. The commissioner braced his fists on the work surface of the desk and lifted his bulk halfway from the chair. The riders are a disease like rabies. Marlowe cleared his throat. That's one way to look at them. Don't be servilely civil to me. That is an accurate clinical description of the riders. They are a cerebral infection. You mean their powers of emergency, telepathy, and precognition, their seeming secondary personality, all that's a hallucination. Marlowe was fevered as he asked it. It was at last some confirmation of his own theory. The whole world was sick, except him. That is exactly what I don't mean, the commissioner said contemptuously. The riders are real entities, capable of real miracles so far as we are concerned, but they aren't mammals or insects or pure energy forms. They are viruses, viruses that can think. Marlowe asked, aghast. No, no one unit of the strain can think, but chains of them can. Together they form different combinations and responses, like analog components or brain synapses. Objectively, They are an infection that can enter the body anywhere, but that always spread to the prefrontal lobes, like rabies. Only they don't destroy tissue. The riders are benign parasites. That's one word for them, Marlowe admitted. But if they are a virus, there must be antibodies. Is that the word for them? The fat man snorted unpleasantly. You can't fight an infection that is smart enough to consciously change its shape and fight back. Natural adaptation and mutation are tough enough. Besides, nobody would stand for being cured of his rider, any more than you would let me cure you of having eyes. Then what was your point in telling me the nature of the riders? You weren't merely conducting an adult education class. True. The commissioner burped delicately and settled back in his chair. As a matter of fact, there is one thing I left out. The riders aren't suited for Earth. They have difficulty in adapting themselves to live on this planet. Once they get into a human being, they are okay. But before that, they are weak and have to get hothouse care. Exactly that. Hothouse care. Malloy's tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He pulled it loose and said, "And you can break the windows of hothouses." The commissioner smiled. It was unpleasant to watch. "Nothing personal, Marlowe," the commissioner whispered almost subvocally as they lay together in the green ooze, "but we haven't known you long enough to give you our trust. The first false step will be a long one for you. Exactly 6 feet. Marlowe tried to squint through the foggy darkness and almost instantly gave it up. "You can't blame me for everything, Commissioner. I told you I wasn't convinced that some of the riders in there won't precog our plans to save themselves. All the ones we are going to destroy are the unhooked up ones. They can't send anything, any more than one unattached telephone could. They aren't really very good with their psi powers. It's strictly an emergency talent, like our sudden spurts of adrenaline." He gave an unsatisfied grunt and bellied forward dupe ahead of Marlowe. The commissioner and an unstable stable of jockeys who had been coming into town for weeks lay the secret hatchery of unhosted rider viruses. They could only multiply beyond a certain self-maintaining balance inside the human body and had to be grown in cultures on Earth, outside the healthy climate of a null-gravity, radiated vacuum in space. It was the commissioner's plan to destroy all the virus cultures, so that in 18 years or so there would come along a rider-free generation to outnumber the minor supermen still infected by the riders. Marlowe had a lot of doubts about the plan, but he was willing to go along for his own reasons. During the past few weeks of indoctrination and commando training, Marlowe had had time to think. It hadn't taken nearly that long to figure out the commissioner. The commissioner was simply a man who had to have power. And he couldn't stand for a whole human race to be more powerful than he was, just because of a lack within himself. He was out to pull everybody down to his level so he could stand out again and take over still. Marlowe thought, "I may have something to say about that." The men and a few women crawled through the semi-tropical Florida mud toward the low buildings glimmering in the light from the thin crescent of moon. Marlowe elbowed a foot closer to the hothouse breeding factory up to here in stinking muck. Any second now, he thought, somebody is going to roll over on a cottonmouth. "Ready with your cloths," a man next to him relayed, first catching his attention and mostly lip-cinching it. Marlowe dug out his asphyxiant pad and readied the tab to pull off the plastic coating clamped over the guards' faces. The catalytic agent would rapidly absorb the men's oxygen. With a partial vacuum in the mouth and larynx, no cries could carry, and the victim would rapidly black out. The pad would be removed, and the guards would be allowed to catch up on their air intake. They wouldn't be harmed in any way final, so their emergency psi warning system wasn't supposed to cut in. Marlowe shrugged. The plan would never work. It was based on equal parts of megalomania and wishful thinking. Marlowe's only problem was when and how to best expose the plot before it was found out without his help. He couldn't stand up and shout a warning. If he tried that, one of the fanatic jockeys was sure to clamp an asphyxiant pad over his face, and, with him, they might not be considerate enough to remove it. Only a treacherous, self-seeking rat would even think of exposing these poor, misguided people and betraying his own race to some extraterrestrial viruses. Malloy's elbows slipped out from under him, and he went face first into the mud. He forced himself to keep from spluttering and lifted his head. Where had that idea come from? For one adrenaline-charged moment, he thought he had finally acquired a rider. But no, a rider would hardly urge him to carry out an attack against the citadel of existence to its own kind. It had to be something simpler, more elemental than that. The voice had been his own conscience crying out against treason. He followed the probable train of circumstances. If he heeded his conscience, he would most probably be killed in this useless attack. He doubted that this was the only breeding chamber for riders, or that if it were, the riders, safely in human bodies, couldn't transplant part of themselves and start new cultures. If he wasn't killed, he would probably be returned to his cell. His padded cell by rider-ridden people. If he were somehow let off, he would be left to wander the streets. A public ward, the trouble with his conscience was that it wasn't logical, and it had a poor memory. It didn't recall those 3.5 years mislaid in an asylum, only an unprincipled. Malloy shut it off and felt a drop of sweat running down the deep crevices between his eyebrows. My only problem, he reminded himself again and again, is how and when to expose this raid before they discover it, without my help. The solution bloomed in his mind. It was remarkable how well the human mind could operate under stress. He half rose from the mud so he would be silhouetted to anybody watching, and fell back. The guards hadn't spotted him, but he heard the jockeys scurrying toward him through the mud. The squishing halted near him. He waited. The commandos moved ahead, leaving him behind when he felt it was safe. Malloy took the asphyxiant pad off his face, a pad without the transparent plastic coat being pulled off. He made out a buddy team of jockeys almost on top of the first rider-ridden manned post. All the others had to be far ahead. Malloy leaped to his feet, or tried to. He managed to slosh to his knees. "Raid," he screamed. "Jockeys are raiding the hothouse." The lights flared up, a magnesium 4th of July night glare. Guards with guns sprang from everywhere. The guns went into action. Clouds of crystalline asphyxian snowed down on the raiders. From far back, Malloy watched in satisfaction. The sound came from behind him. The commissioner blobbed forward, a distorted ball of slimy mud. "I will crush you under my foot like a bloated white grub," the fat man announced with sincerity. Malloy's eyes narrowed in the darkness. "Stay away from me, Commissioner, or I'll push you down, way, way down." The blocky figure retreated a step, quivering impotently. Malloy nodded to himself. The commissioner had spoken too knowingly of a terrible fear of falling. The interrogator was the younger man who sat next to Dr. Harrison during Malloy's release from the hospital. "I feel you'd like to know my identity, Mr. Malloy." "My name is Pearson. I work for the federal government." "Now would you tell me just what you hope to gain by betraying the assault force of jockeys?" It was the crux of the matter. Malloy took a deep breath and said it. "I want a rider. I want to be like everybody else. If you people have any sense of gratitude and justice, and you seem to, you'll set up some kind of scientific project to find out why I haven't caught a case of riders, and to see that I am properly infected." Pearson leaned back in the other straight chair inside the rough boarded-out building. "Mr. Malloy, we know why none of the riders who drifted in from outer space infected you. You already had a rider, an entirely human, not alien one. You are schizoid. You have a split personality. You adjusted to it to an incredible degree and submerged it, but it was still there, and no alien would touch a man who already had two minds. Malloy felt no emotion, only an inescapable acceptance. My conscience, he said. Pearson nodded. Your second personality is becoming steadily less recessive. But telepathy, all the tricks of the writers, I can't do them. You will be able to. Two minds are better than one. It would seem that kinstophrenia is the natural state of supermen, when properly trained and integrated. In fact, you should be able to accomplish more than a writer-written man. You will have two human personalities, and the writers are little more than viruses conscious of their own existence. You mean I'm a superman? Yes, but unfortunately, you are a threat to the present order because of your non-writer attitude. You are being returned to your padded cell. There are guards outside. I hope you will walk out quietly to meet them. Malloy walked out quietly to meet the guards who would take him away. On his way out, he met Grayson. Amory coming in. Pearson shook hands warmly with the publisher. Mr. Amory, the government owes you a vote of thanks for recommending Malloy for this job of infiltrating the jocks. Turning against one of your own kind is never easy. Amory laughed lightly. Malloy was not one of my kind. He was an editor, even worse than that, I think. In his attitude, he always remained no more than a writer. I understand he is being returned to confinement. Pearson looked troubled. Yes, sir. Personally, I would feel more comfortable if he were eliminated. I am not at all sure that we can keep Malloy under lock and key once he develops his potential of schizophrenia. I know. Unhappily, the primitive ethics of the writers prevent our taking care of Mike in the most efficient way. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. May I sit down? Please do, sir, said Pearson. Amory took the vacant chair and leaned forward with boyish enthusiasm. Mr. Pearson, I have faith in humanity. I believe we can keep the benefits of any situation, including the riders, and eliminate the disadvantages and limitations. My boy, all of us must start to work to find a way to override the riders. End of The Last Trespasser by Jim Harmon.
Pick a Crime by Richard Rein Smith. The girl was tall, wide-eyed, and brunette. She had the right curves in the right places and would have been beautiful if her nose had been smaller, if her mouth had been larger, and if her hair had been wavy instead of straight. "Hank said you wanted to see me," she said when she stopped beside Joe's table. "Ah." Joe nodded at the other chair. "Have a seat." He reached into a pocket, withdrew 5 $10 bills and handed them to her. "I want you to do a job for me. It'll only take a few minutes." The girl counted the money, then placed it in her purse. Joe noticed a small counterfeit detector inside the purse before she closed it. "What's the job? Tell you later." He gulped the remainder of his drink, almost pouring it down his throat. "Hey, you trying to make yourself sick?" "Not sick. Drunk." "Been trying to get drunk all afternoon." As the liquor settled in his stomach, he waited for the warm glow. But the glow didn't come. The bartender had watered his drink again. "Trying to get drunk?" the girl inquired. "Are you crazy?" "No. It's simple. If I get drunk, I can join the AAA and get free room and board for a month while they give me a treatment." It was easy enough to understand, he reflected, but a lot harder to do. The SPA robot bartenders saw to it that anyone got high if they wanted, but comparatively few got drunk. Each bartender could not only mix drinks but could also judge by a man's actions and speech when he was on the verge of drunkenness. At the proper time, since drunkenness was illegal, a bartender always watered the drinks. Joe had tried dozens of times in dozens of bars to outsmart them, but had always failed. and in all of New York's millions there had been only 100 cases of intoxication during the previous year. The girl laughed. If you are that hard up, I don't know if I should take this 50 or not. Why don't you go out and get a job like everyone else? As an answer, Joe handed her his SpeePay ID card. She grunted when she saw the large letters that indicated the owner had dangerous criminal tendencies. When she handed the card back, Joe fought an impulse to tear it to pieces. He'd done that once and gone through a mountain of red tape to get another. Everyone was required by law to carry a SPA ID card and show it upon request. I am sorry, the girl said. I didn't know you were a DCT and who'll hire a guy with criminal tendencies. You know the score when you try to get a job. They ask to see your ID before they even tell you if there is an opening or not. If your SpeePay ID says you are a DCT, you are Sol, and they tell you there is no openings. Oh, I've had several jobs like all DCTs get. I've been a garbage man, street cleaner, ditch digger. On the other side of the room, the jukebox came to life with a roar and a group of teenagers scrambled to the dance floor. Feeling safe from hidden microphones because of the uproar, he leaned across the table and whispered in the girl's ear, "That's what I want to hire you for. I want you to help me commit a crime. If I get convicted of a crime, I'll be able to get a good job." The girl's lips formed a bright red circle. "Say, you really got big plans, don't you?" He smiled at her admiration. It was something big to plan a crime. A civilization weary of murder, robbery, kidnapping, counterfeiting, blackmail, sexual violation, arson, and drunkenness had originated the SPA Crime Prevention Association. There were no longer any prisons. SPA officials had declared loudly and emphatically that their job was to prevent crime, not punish it. And prevent it they did. With thousands of ingenious crime prevention devices and methods, they had made crime almost impossible. And during the previous year, only a few hundred men in the whole country had been convicted of criminal acts. No crime was ever punished. If a man was smart enough to kill someone, for instance, he wasn't sent to prison to be punished. He wasn't punished at all. Instead, he was sent to a hospital where all criminal tendencies were removed from his mind by psychologists, shock treatments, encephalographic devices, a form of prefrontal lobotomy, and a dozen other methods. An expensive operation, but since there were few criminals, only 10 in New York during the past year, any city could afford the SPA hospitals. The SPA system was actually cheaper than previous methods because it did away with the damage caused by countless crimes, did away with prisons and their guards, large police forces, squad cars, and weapons. And, ironically, a man who did commit a crime was a sort of hero. He was a hero to the millions of men and women who had suppressed impulses to kill someone, beat their mates, get drunk, or kick a dog. Not only a hero, but because of the SPA treatment, he was, when he left one of the SPA hospitals, a thoroughly honest and hard-working individual. A man who could be trusted with any responsibility, any amount of money, and therefore an ex, a convicted criminal who received the treatment, was commonly called an ex, because he was, in the strictest sense of the word, an ex-criminal. An ex was always offered the best jobs. "Well," the girl said, "I'm honored, really. But I got a date at 10. Let's get it over with. You said it'd only take a few minutes." "Okay. Let's go." The girl followed him across the room, around tables, through a door, down a hall, through a back door, and into the alley. She followed him up the dark alley until he turned suddenly and ripped her blouse and skirt. He surprised her completely, but when she recovered, she backed away, her body poised like a wrestler's. "What's the big idea?" "Scream," Joe said. "Scream as loud as you can, and when the cops get here, tell them I tried to sexually violate you." The plan was perfect, he told himself. Attempted sexual violation was one of the few things that was a crime merely because a man attempted it. A crime because it theoretically inflicted psychological injury upon the intended victim, and because millions of women voters had voted it a crime. On the other hand, attempted murder, robbery, kidnapping, etc., were not crimes. They weren't crimes because the DCT didn't complete the act, and if he didn't complete the act, that meant simply that the SPA had once again functioned properly. The girl shook her head vigorously. "Sorry, buddy, can't help you that way. Why didn't you tell me what you wanted?" "What's the matter?" Joe complained. "I am not asking you to do anything wrong, you stupid jerk. What do you think this is? The Middle Ages? Don't you know, almost every woman knows how to defend herself. I am a sergeant in the WSDA." Joe groaned. The WSDA, Women's Self-Defense Association, a branch of the SPA. The WSDA gave free instruction in judo and jiu-jitsu, even developed new techniques of wrestling, and instructed only women in those new techniques. The girl was still shaking her head. "Can't do it, buddy. I'd lose my rank if you were convicted of—" "Do I have to make you scream?" Joe inquired tiredly and advanced toward the girl. "And that rank carries a lot of weight, hey? Stop it." Joe discovered to his dismay that the girl was telling the truth when she said she was a sergeant in the WSDA. He felt her hands on his body, and in the time it takes to blink twice, he was flying through the air. The alley's concrete floor was hard. It had always been hard, but he became acutely aware of its lack of resiliency when his head struck it. There was a wonderful moment while the world was filled with beautiful stars and streaks of lightning through which he heard distant police sirens. But the wonderful moment didn't last long, and darkness closed in on him. When he awoke, a rough voice was saying, "Okay, snap out of it." He opened his eyes and recognized the police commissioner's office. It would be hard not to recognize. The room was large, devoid of furniture except for a desk and chairs, but the walls were lined with the controls of television screens, electronic calculators, and 100 other machines that formed New York's mechanical police force. Commissioner Hendricks was a remarkable character. There was something wrong with his glands, and he was a huge, greasy bulk of a man with bushy eyebrows and a double chin. His steel-gray eyes showed something of his intelligence, and he would have gone far in politics if fate hadn't made him so ugly. For more than half the voters who elected men to high political positions were women. Anyone who knew Hendricks well liked him, for he was a friendly, likable person. But the millions of women voters who saw his face on posters and on their television screens saw only the ugly face and heard only the harsh voice. The President of the United States was a capable man, but also a very handsome one. And the fact that a man who looked something like a bulldog had been elected as New York's police commissioner was a credit to Hendricks and millions of women voters. "Gibble here is the girl?" Joe asked. "I processed her while you were out cold. She left Joe." "You okay?" Joe said. "I'll save you the trouble." "I admit it. Attempted sexual violation, I confess." Hendricks smiled. "Sorry, Joe. You missed the boat again." He reached out and turned a dial on his desktop. "We had a microphone hidden in that alley. We have a lot of microphones hidden in a lot of alleys. You'd be surprised at the number of conspiracies that take place in alleys." Joe listened numbly to his voice as it came from one of the hundreds of machines on the walls. "Scream! Scream as loud as you can, and when the cops get here, tell 'em I tried to sexual violation you." And then the girl's voice, "Sorry, buddy, can't help." He waved his hand. "Okay, shut it off. I confess to conspiracy." Hendricks rose from behind the desk, walked leisurely to where Joe was slouched in a chair. "Give me your SPA ID." Joe handed him the card with trembling fingers. He felt as if the world had collapsed beneath him. Conspiracy to commit a crime wasn't a crime. Anyone could conspire. And if the conspirators were prevented from committing a crime, then that meant the SPA had functioned properly once again. That meant the SPA had once again prevented crime, and the SPA didn't punish crimes or attempted crimes, and it didn't attempt to prevent crimes by punishment. If it did, That would be a violation of the new civil rights. Hendricks crossed the room, deposited the card in a slot, and punched a button. The machine hummed, and a new card appeared. When Hendricks handed him the new card, Joe saw that the words "De Angeris Criminal Tendenus" were now in red and larger than before. And, in slightly smaller print, the ID card stated that the owner was a DCT first class. "You've graduated," Hendricks said coldly. "You guys never learn, do you?" "Now, you are a DCT first class instead of a second class. You know what that means." Hendricks leaned closer until Joe could feel his breath on his face. "That means your case history will be turned over to the newspapers. You'll be the hobby of thousands of amateur cops. You know how it works? It's like this. The Joneses are sitting around tomorrow night, and they're bored. Then Mr. Jones says, 'Let's go watch this, Joe Harper.' So they look up your record. Amateur cops always keep records of first classes in scrapbooks, and they see that you stop frequently at Walt's Tavern. So they go there, and they sit and drink and watch you, trying not to let you know they're watching you. They watch you all night, just hoping you'll do something exciting, like trying to kill someone, so they can be the first ones to yell, 'Police.' They'll watch you because it's exciting to be an amateur cop, and if they ever did prevent you from committing a crime, they'd get a nice reward and they'd be famous." "Lay off," Joe said. "I got a headache. Batgirl." Hendricks leaned even closer and glared. "You listen, Joe. This is interesting. You see, it doesn't stop with Mr. and Mrs. Jones. There is thousands of people like them. Years ago, they got their kicks from reading about guys like you. But these days, things are dull because it's rare when anyone commits a crime. So every time you walk down the street, there'll be at least a dozen of them following you. And no matter where you go, you can bet there'll be some of them sitting next to you, standing next to you. During the day, they'll take your picture with their spy cameras that look like buttons on their coats. At night, they'll peep at you through your keyhole. Your neighbors across the street will watch you through binoculars and lay off." Joe squirmed in the chair. He'd been lectured by Hendricks before, and it was always an unpleasant experience. The huge man was like a talking machine once he got started, a machine that couldn't be stopped. "And the kids are the worst," Hendricks continued. "They have junior SPA clubs. They keep records of hoodlums like you in little cardboard boxes. They'll stare at you on the street and stare at you through restaurant windows while you are eating meals. They'll follow you in public restrooms and watch you out of the corners of their eyes while they wash their little hands. And almost every day when you look back, you'll see a dozen freckle-faced little boys following you half a block behind, giggling and gaping at you. They'll follow you until the day you die because you are a freak." Joe couldn't stand the breath in his face any longer. He rose and paced the floor. "And it doesn't end there, Joe. It goes on and on. You'll be the object of every do-gooder and parapsychologist. Strangers will stop you on the street and say, 'I'd like to help you, friend.' Then they'll ask you queer questions like, 'Did your father reject you when you were a child? Do you like girls? How does it feel to be a DCT first class?' And then there'll be the strangers who hate DCTs. They'll stop you on the street and insult you, call you names, spit on you, and okay, goddammit, stop it." Hendricks stopped, wiped the sweat from his face with a handkerchief, and lit a cigarette. "I'm doing you a favor, Joe. I'm trying to explain something you are too dumb to realize by yourself. We've taught everyone to hate crime and criminals, to hate them as nothing has ever been hated before. Today, a criminal is a freak, an alien. Your life will be a living hell if you don't leave New York. You should go to some small town where there aren't many people, or be a hermit, or go to Iceland, or—" Joe eyed the huge man suspiciously. "Favor, did you say? The day you do me a favor?" Hendricks shrugged his shoulders negligently. "Not entirely a favor. I want to get rid of you. Usually I come up here and sit around and read books, but guys like you are a nuisance and take up my time. I couldn't leave if I wanted to, Joe said. I am flat broke. Thanks to your SPA system, ADCT can't get a decent job. Hendricks reached into a pocket, withdrew several bills and extended them. I'll loan you some money. You can sign an IOU and pay me back a little at a time. Joe waved the money away. Listen, why don't you do me a favor? Why don't you frame me if I am such a nuisance? Pin a crime on me. Any crime. Can't do it. Convicting a man of a crime he didn't commit is a violation of civil rights and a crime in itself. Why don't you take the free psychotreatment? A man doesn't have to be a DCT with the free treatment. Psychologists can remove all your criminal tendencies and go to those head shrinkers. Hendricks shrugged again. Have it your way, Joe laughed. If your damn SPA is so all-powerful, why can't you make me go? Violation of civil rights. Damn it, there must be some way you can help me. We both want the same thing. We both want to see me convicted of a crime. How can I help you without committing a crime myself? Hendricks walked to his desk, opened a drawer and removed a small black book. See this? It contains names and addresses of all the people in New York who aren't properly protected. Every week we find people who aren't protected properly, blind spots in our protection devices. As soon as we find them, we take steps to install anti-robbery devices. But this is a big city, and sometimes it takes days to get the work done. In the meantime, any one of these people could be robbed. But what can I do? I can't hold this book in front of your nose and say, "Here, Joe, pick a name and go out and rob him." He laughed nervously. If I did that, I'd be committing a crime myself. He placed the book on the desktop, took a handkerchief from a pocket again, and wiped sweat from his face. Excuse me a minute? I am dying of thirst. There is a water cooler in the next room. Joe stared at the door to the adjoining office as it closed behind the big man. Hendricks was, unbelievably, offering him a victim, offering him a crime. Almost running to the desk, Joe opened the book, selected a name and address, and memorized it. Don Growski, apartment 24, 2141 Orange Saint. When Hendricks came back, Joe said, "Thanks." "Huh? Thanks for what? I didn't do anything." When Joe reached the street, he hurried toward the nearest subway. As a child, he had been frightened of the dark. As a man, he wasn't afraid of the dark itself, but the darkened city always made him feel ill at ease. The uneasiness was more than anything else caused by his own imagination. He hated the SPA, and at night he couldn't shrug the feeling that the SPA lurked in every shadow, watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. Imagination or not, the SPA was almost everywhere a person went. 24 hours a day, millions of microphones hidden in taverns, alleys, restaurants, subways, and every other place imaginable waited for someone to say the wrong thing. Everything the microphones picked up was routed to the SPA brain, a monster electronic calculator. If the words, "Let's see a movie," were received in the brain, they were discarded. But if the words, "Let's roll this guy," were received, the message was traced and a police helicopter would be at the scene in 2 minutes. And scattered all over the city were not only hidden microphones, but hidden television cameras that relayed visual messages to the brain, and hidden machines that could detect a knife or a gun in someone's pocket at 40 yards. Every place of business, from the largest bank to the smallest grocery store, was absolutely impenetrable. No one had even tried to rob a place of business for years. Segson was next to impossible because of the heat detectors, devices placed in every building that could detect, radar-like, any intensity of heat above that caused by a cigarette lighter. Chemical research had made poisoning someone an impossibility. There were no drugs containing poison, and while an ant poison might kill ants, no concentrated amount of it would kill a human. The FBI had always been a powerful organization, but under the supervision of the SPA, it was a scientific colossus. and to think of kidnapping someone or to contemplate the use of narcotics was pointless. A counterfeiter's career was always short-lived. Every place of business and millions of individuals had small counterfeit detectors that could spot a fake and report it directly to the brain. And the percentage of crimes had dwindled even more with the appearance of the robot police officers. Many a criminal in the past had gambled that he could outshoot a pursuing policeman. But the robots were different. They weren't flesh and blood. Bullets bounced off them, and their aim was infallible. It was like a fantastic dream come true. Only the dream wasn't fantastic anymore, with the huge atomic power plants scattered across the country and supplying endless electrical power at ridiculously low prices. No endeavor that required power was fantastic. The power required to operate the SPI devices cost each taxpayer an average of $4 a year, and the invention, development, and manufacture of the devices had cost even less. And the SPI had attacked crime through society itself, striking at the individual. In every city there were neon signs that blinked subliminally with the statement, "Some rhyme is filth." Listening to a radio or watching television. If a person heard station identification, he invariably heard or saw just below perception the words, "Frem is filth," if he went for a walk or a ride. He saw the endless subliminal posters declaring, "Crim is filth." And if he read a magazine or newspaper, he always found, in those little dead spaces where an editor couldn't fit anything else, the below perception words, "Crim is filth." It was monotonous, and after a while a person looked at the words and heard them without thinking about them. And they were imprinted on his subconscious over and over, year after year, until he knew that crime was the same as filth and that criminals were filthy things. Except men like Joe Harper, no system is perfect. Along with thousands of other DCTs, Joe refused to believe it. And when he reached apartment 24 at 2141 Orange Street, he felt as if he'd inherited a gold mine. The hall was dimly lit, but when he stood before the door numbered 24, he could see that the wall on either side of it was new. That is, instead of being covered with dust, dirt, and stains as the other walls were, it was clean. The building was an old one. The hall was wide, and the owner had obviously constructed a wall across the hall, creating another room. If the owner had reported the new room as required by law, it would have been wired with SPI burglar-proof devices. But evidently, he didn't want to pay for installation. When Joe entered the cubbyhole, he had to stand to one side in order to close the door behind him. The place was barely large enough for the bed, chair, and bureau. It was a place where a man could fall down at night and sleep, but where no normal man could live day after day. Fearing that someone might detect him before he actually committed the crime, Joe hurried to the bureau and searched it. He broke out in a sweat when he found nothing but underwear and old magazines. If he stole underwear and magazines, it would still be a crime, but the newspapers would splash satirical headlines. Instead of being respected as a successful criminal, he would be ridiculed. He stopped sweating when he found a watch under a pile of underwear. The crystal was broken, one hand was missing, and it wouldn't run, but perfection itself, engraved on the back, was the inscription, "To John, with love." His trial would be a clean-cut one. It would be easy for the SPA to prove ownership and that a crime had been committed. Chuckling with joy, he opened the window and shouted, "Thief! Police! Help!" He waited a few seconds and then ran. When he reached the street, a police helicopter landed next to him. Strong metal arms seized him. Cameras clicked and recorded the damning evidence. When Joe was securely handcuffed to a seat inside the helicopter, the metal police officers rang doorbells. There was a reward for anyone who reported a crime, but no one admitted shouting the wording. He was having a nightmare when he heard the voice. "Hey, wake up!" Hey, he opened his eyes, saw Hendricks' ugly face and thought for a minute he was still having the nightmare. "I just saw your doctor," Hendricks said. "He says your treatment is over. You can go home now." I thought I'd give you a lift." As Joe dressed, he searched his mind and tried to find some difference. During the treatment, he had been unconscious or drugged, unable to think. Now he could think clearly, but he could find no difference in himself. He felt more relaxed than he'd ever felt before, but that could be an after effect of all the sedatives he'd been given. And, he noticed when he looked in the mirror, he was paler. The treatment had taken months, and he had, between operations, been locked in his room. Hendricks was standing by the window. Joe stared at the massive back. Deliberately goading his mind, he discovered the biggest change. Before, the mere sight of the man had aroused an intense hatred. Now, even when he tried, he succeeded in arousing only a mild hatred. They had toned down his capacity to hate, but not done away with it altogether. "Come here and take a look at your public," said Hendricks. Joe went to the window 3 stories below. A large crowd had gathered on the hospital steps. A band, photographers, television trucks, cameramen, and autograph hunters. He'd waited a long time for this day, but now, another change in him. He put the emotion into words. "I don't feel like a hero. Funny, but I don't. Hero." Hendricks laughed, and with his powerful lungs it sounded like a bull snorting. "You think a successful criminal is a hero, you stupid." He laughed again and waved a hand at the crowd below them. "You think those people are down there because they admire what you did. They're down there waiting for you because they're curious, because they're glad the SPA caught you, and because they're glad you're an ex-criminal now, and because of your treatment, you'll never be able to commit another crime as long as you live. And that's the kind of guy they admire. So they want to see you shake your hand and get your autograph." Joe didn't understand Hendricks completely, but the part he did understand, he didn't believe. A crowd was waiting for him. He could see the people with his own eyes. When he left the hospital, they'd cheer and shout and ask for his autograph. If he wasn't a hero, what was he? It took half an hour to get through the crowd. Cameras clicked all around him. 100 kids asked for his autograph. Everyone talked at once and cheered, smiled, laughed, patted him on the back, and cheered some more. Only one thing confused him during all the excitement. A white-haired old lady with tears in her eyes said, "Thank heaven it was only a watch. Thank heaven you didn't kill someone. God bless you, son." And then the old lady had handed him a box of fudge and left him in total confusion. What she said didn't make sense. If he had killed someone rather than stealing a watch, he would be even more of a hero, and the crowd would have cheered even louder. He knew he had stood outside the SPA hospitals many times, and the crowds always cheered louder when an ex-murderer came out. In Hendricks' robot-chauffeured car, he ate the fudge and consoled himself with the thought, "People are funny. Who can understand them?" Feeling happy for one of the few times in his life, he turned toward Hendricks and said, "Thanks for what you did. It turned out great. I'll be able to get a good job now. That's why I met you at the hospital," Hendricks said. "I want to explain some things. I've known you for a long time, and I know you are spectacularly dumb. You can't figure out some things for yourself, and I don't want you walking around the rest of your life thinking I did you a favor." Joe frowned. Few men had ever done him a favor, and he had rarely thanked anyone for anything. And now, after thanking the man who'd done him the biggest favor of all, the man was denying it. "You robbed Galeski's apartment," Hendricks said. "Galeski is a SPA employee, and he doesn't live in the apartment you robbed. The SPA pays the rent for that one, and he lives in another. We have a lot of places like that. You see, it gives us a way to get rid of saps like you before they do real damage. We use it as a last resort when a DCT first class won't take the free psycho treatment or, well, it's still a favor." Hendricks' face hardened. "Dave, you wouldn't know a favor if you stumbled over one. I did it because it's standard procedure for your type of case. Anyone can, free of charge, have treatment by the best psychologists." Any DCT can stop being a DCT by simply asking for the treatment and taking it. But you wouldn't do that. You wanted to commit a crime, get caught, and be a hero, an X. The car passed one of the SPA playgrounds. Boys and girls of all ages were laughing, squealing with joy as they played games designed by SPA psychologists to relieve tension. And, despite the treatment, Joe shuddered when he saw the psychologists standing to one side, quietly watching the children. The whole world was filled with SPA employees and volunteer workers. Everywhere you went, it was there quietly watching you and analyzing you. And if you showed criminal tendencies, it watched you even more closely and analyzed you even more deeply until it took you apart and put you back together again the way it wanted you to be. Being an X, you'll get the kind of job you always wanted, Hendricks continued. You'll get a good-paying job, but you'll work for it. You'll work 8 hours a day. Work harder than you've ever worked before in your life. Because every time you start to loaf, a voice in your head is going to say, work. Work. X's always get good jobs because employers know they're good workers. But during these next few days, you'll discover what being an X is like. You see, Joe, the treatment can't possibly take all the criminal tendencies out of a man, so the treatment does the next best thing. You'll find a set of laws written in your mind. You might want to break one now and then, but you won't be able. I'll give you an illustration. Joe's face reddened as Hendricks proceeded to call him a series of names. He wanted to smash the fat, grinning face, but the muscles in his arm froze before it moved it an inch. And worse than that, a brief pain ripped through his skull, a pain so intense that had it lasted a second longer, he would have screamed in agony. And above the pain, a voice whispered in his head, unlawful to strike someone except in self-defense. He opened his mouth to tell Hendricks exactly what he thought of him, the CPA, the whole world. But the words stayed in his throat. The pain returned, and the mental voice whispered, unlawful to curse. He had never heard how the treatment prevented the X from committing a crime, and now that he knew, it didn't seem fair. He decided to tell the whole story to the newspapers as soon as he could. And as soon as that decision formed in his mind, his body froze, the pain returned, and the voice, unlawful to divulge SPA procedure. See what I mean? Hendricks asked. A century ago you would have been locked in a prison, and taxpayers' money would have supported you until the day you died. With the SPA system, you are returned to society, a useful citizen, unable to commit the smallest crime. And you got a big hand in your dirty little mind that's going to slap it every time you get the wrong kind of thought. It'll keep slapping you until you learn. It might take weeks, months, or years, but you'll learn sooner or later to not even think about doing anything wrong. He lit a cigarette and blew a smoke ring at the car's plush ceiling. It's a great system, isn't it, Joe? A true democracy. Even a jerk like you is free to do what he wants as long as it's legal. I think it's a lousy, filthy system. Joe's head was still tingling with pain, and he felt suffocated. The SPA was everywhere, only now it was also inside his head, telling him he couldn't do this, couldn't do that. All his life it had been telling him he couldn't do things he wanted to do, and now, Hendricks laughed, you'll change your opinion. We live in a clean, wonderful world, Joe, a world of happy, healthy people. Except for freaks like yourself, criminals are. Let me out. Joe grabbed at the door and was on the sidewalk, slamming the door behind him before the car stopped completely. He stared at the car as it pulled away from the curb and glided into the stream of traffic again. He realized he was a prisoner inside his own body, made a prisoner by a world that hated him back. He wanted to spit his contempt, but the increasingly familiar pain and voice prevented him.
It was unlawful to spit on a sidewalk. End of Pick a Crime by Richard Rein Smith.
Formula for Murder by Milton A Rothman. It's easy to get away with murder. Just prove insanity, but make sure you hide the method in your madness. The figure of Professor Glover slipped from the surface of the space station and twinkled away among the stars. Jim Britton stared at it, as though he could call it back by the ferocity of his gaze. He stood paralyzed by helplessness while the spacesuited body plummeted off into the void until he could no longer follow its motion towards the dazzling sun. Seized by an uncontrollable shaking, he dropped the radiophone antenna which he had ripped from Glover's back and flung himself down flat upon the surface of the station, where he clung while catching his breath. A vast donut, 25 miles in diameter. The space station stood with no apparent motion 1,000 miles above the surface of the Earth. It floated in a sea of scintillating stars, like diamonds scattered upon the blackest velvet. "Jim, what's the matter?" John Callahan's voice grated in Britton's headpiece. Glover's line broke loose. Britton gasped. "He's gone." "What?" "I am coming back in. Give me a hand." Britton began the long crawl back to the entrance port, his nerves too shattered to attempt at standing up. He was several yards away when another spacesuited figure emerged from the port and helped him stagger the rest of the way. Inside the airlock, he collapsed. In a small room within a large hospital, the two men sat talking. It was a featureless room with pale green walls, containing a desk, 2 soft chairs, and a leather couch. The doctor, middle-aged, inconspicuous, wearing glasses, a small mustache, and a gray suit, sat in one chair. Facing him in the other chair, Jim Britton, young, lean, and visibly depressed, wore pajamas and a hospital robe. "You've been a sick boy," Morris Wolfe told Jim Britton in a conversational tone. "I guess so." Britton scratched at the arm of his chair and fingered the sleeve of his gown. "You are coming along, though. When you arrived at the hospital a week ago, you had to be wheeled in and fed like a baby. Now, you've pulled out of the hole, and we're ready to do some real talking." "But Doc, I don't know what happened, honestly." One minute Glover was starting to climb down into the ion source chamber, and the next minute his magnet line came loose. And when I grabbed after him, I caught his phone antenna and ripped it off. Then I got the shakes, and the next thing I knew, I was back on Earth in the hospital. The psychiatrist reached for his pipe and began to fill it from a large can on the desk. "It's a great shock to have the person next to you snuffed out like that," he said. "Some people can take it standing up when you fall apart like that. We want to know the reason, so that it won't happen again." Britton shrugged. "What's the difference? I'll never work in a laboratory again, let alone the Lunatron. I'll never finish my research, and I'll never get my degree." His voice trailed off in a discouraged whisper. Wolfe watched him for a moment. "That kind of talk is the reason you are still here. You'll work in a laboratory again, and you'll get your degree. You are still not quite well. I am here to help you get well." Britton shrugged again. "Okay, bring on the dancing girls," he said in a resigned tone. There were no dancing girls, however, only a tall, blonde, squarish doctor in a white dress who waited for them in the therapy room. Her cigarette made a cocky angle with the firm line of her mouth as she made final adjustments on the bank of electronic equipment that lined one whole wall. "Jim, this is Dr. Heller," Wolfe told him as they walked into the room. "She will work with us in here. Now suppose you get up on this table." The 2 husky attendants who were always in the background helped Britton onto the table and strapped him down. As Wolfe fastened the electrodes to Britton's head, he said conversationally, "In the old days we would have just sat and talked to each other. It would have taken months to get to first base. Now we have ways of aiding the memory, of triggering associations, of lowering resistances to thoughts. It makes psychotherapy a much less tedious process than it used to be." As he spoke, he slipped a hypodermic needle into Britton's arm. "Now suppose we see how much we can remember. Let's begin the day before Glover was killed. I want you to think back to that day and remember everything that happened, how you felt, what you thought about. We want to go through this traumatic experience of yours. and related to the elements in your life which caused such a profound shock. And, in addition, Wolf thought bleakly to himself, a good many people were anxious to know other things. For example, was Glover's demise at this particular time a coincidence? The Atomic Energy Commission, though cagey about their reasons, had given top priority to the answers to their questions. The strength of official interest in this case was further evidenced by the assignment of Bill Grady and Calvin Jones as attendants to Jim Britton. For some time, Morris Wolf had wondered vaguely why two such clean-cut and alert young men should follow the low-paid calling of hospital attendant. Until recently, he had become aware that their paychecks actually came from the U.S. Treasury by way of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Now," Wolf said as Alma Heller switched on the tape recorder, "tell us what you remember." After a year of being stationed on the Lunatron, Jim Britton had the feeling of being fed up. Lunatics they call us, he thought, wheel crazy, looting out of the ports. He saw a black starry space in which the only thing that ever changed was the view of the Earth, 1,000 miles below, and the moon, which was sometimes on one side and sometimes on the other. The stars were incredible jewels, and the sun was something that one never looked at with mortal eyes. There was bitterness in his heart as he thought of his initial thrill at being chosen to do his thesis research on the Lunatron. He had been an envied boy, but now, after a year, he would have given the chance to the first bidder. But there was no way to back out, short of breaking his contract or breaking his neck. Passage to and from Earth was too costly to be used on weekend vacations. Many people on Earth would have been excited by the chance to work for 2 years with Professor Glover on the 10,000 billion volt proton centrotron which they called the Lunatron. Most physicists thought they were lucky if they could spend a few months with the 50 billion volt antique at Brookhaven. But at Brookhaven you are only a few minutes from New York. Up on the space laboratory, Britton was a year from any place, and every day that went by made it a day less. "Johnny, what's the first thing you're going to do when you get back to Rhodesia?" he asked his roommate. Britton sat twanging half-heartedly at his guitar while Johnny lay undressed on his bunk, his body hard and black against the white sheet. "Oh, I have a good job lined up in a brand new research institute in Salisbury." "I don't mean that," Britton said impatiently. Johnny was such a serious boy. "I mean, don't you think of all the fun you are going to have when you get back to Earth? Don't you think of getting a girlfriend and living like everybody else's lives?" But Johnny's deep brown eyes remained serious, and he said, "Coming up here has been a great opportunity to learn something, so that I will be able to do good work when I get back. Everybody down there does not get such a chance." Well, Britton thought, that's how it had been with him at first. Now he could think of nothing but walking, arm in arm, with a pretty girl, his girl, down the street of a big city at night. Drinking in the excitement, the feeling of being with other people among the bright lights, under a sky that would be dark blue instead of black, that might have clouds in it, that might even send down rain, instead of being the stark, changeless, interstellar space that existed up above. Scientists aren't supposed to have thoughts like these. But Britton was young, he was homesick, and he was bored. A young, homesick scientist cannot remain a solemn, dedicated, single-minded scientist. The next day at work he absent-mindedly switched on some pieces of apparatus in the wrong order and burned out a minor piece of electronics. "Damn it, Britton!" Professor Glover shouted at him. "Where are your brains? Replacements are expensive up here. Time is expensive." Britton began shaking with rage. Words rushed to his tongue which he choked down unsaid because Glover had the power of life or death over his degree, and these 2 years must not be torn out of his life for nothing. "I am sorry," he said in an unsteady voice. "I guess I am not all here today." "It won't take long to repair the damage. Never mind," Glover said. You are coming off the project anyway. Britton stood still. The anger roared back into his head. I am coming off the project. What happens to the year I've just spent? Glover suddenly seemed more embarrassed than angry. I am sorry, Britton, he said, but it's for your own good. This project has just become classified, and you'd never get a publishable thesis out of it. Britton stood there, looking at Glover. This is a hell of a time to tell me, he exploded finally. What's become so secret about this experiment? Obviously, I can't tell you. I am sorry, but we'll make it up to you somehow. We'll think of something you can do while you are here, and if necessary, you can stay a little longer. Stay longer. Outraged, Britton fled to his room. It was all he could do to stick out the remainder of his 2 years. He could not sleep that night. Little teeth of anger nibbled into his mind, while the basic question repeated itself in endless circles. Why had his experiment been pulled out from under him? Fundamental experiments in high energy. Particle physics were not generally classified secret. What were they doing which had suddenly become so important? The general purpose of the space laboratory was to gather basic information about the laws of nature. The optical telescope studied the planets as well as the farthest nebulae, unimpeded by atmospheric disturbances. The tremendous 25-mile diameter radio telescope pinpointed short-wave radio vibrations from all parts of space. The solid-state group could study the properties of matter in a vacuum chamber of rarity unattainable anywhere on Earth. In Jim Britton's group, known variously as the Elementary Potato Division, the Lunatron Group, or simply as the Lunatics, the topic of investigation was the meson. A long time ago, people had considered atoms the most elementary particles. Then they found out about protons and neutrons, which were the bricks that made up the atomic nuclei. A little later, when scientists learned how to build atom smashers such as the 2 billion-volt proton synchrotron, they found that they could knock mesons out of the nucleus, and they decided that the protons and neutrons were not so simple after all. Year after year, the atom smashers had become bigger and bigger. There came a time when they could not be built on the surface of the Earth any longer. So a space laboratory was conceived, built around the donut of the 10,000 billion-volt proton synchrotron. Protons, whirling around for thousands of cycles in this vast donut, 80 miles in circumference, could acquire energies equal to those of the most powerful cosmic rays. Even mesons shattered at this energy. By inspecting the remnants of these broken mesons, scientists could begin to get some idea as to the ultimate structure of matter and energy. Now, Jim Britton thought, what was there about this work that should suddenly become too secret to be published? Peace had reigned on Earth for many years, and it was once more fashionable to think of science as being free and unbound by security regulations. But not, apparently, here, in Glover's private domain. Rephrase the question, Britton thought. What was there about this work which had suddenly made it desirable for Professor Glover to take Britton off the project? Was there more to this experiment than Britton had seen up to the present? Sitting through the night, Britton thought and calculated, filling his desktop with paper, feeling the frustration of a scientist who spends day after day with the details of an experiment, pushing buttons, reading meters, soldering wires, until he begins to lose sight of the ultimate aim of the project. As he fell asleep, long towards morning, his anger was still at a furious temperature, filling his mind with dreams of a tormented, violent nature, which he forgot promptly upon awakening. Professor Glover stopped by to see him as he ate a late breakfast. "We have a job to do today," Glover said, his voice tinged with an impersonal annoyance that was not directed at Britton. Britton stared up at Glover with a hostility that made no impression upon the scientist. "The ion source has gone bad and has to be replaced," Glover continued. "The spacesuits are being radied in the airlock." "Why us?" Britton complained. What's the matter with the maintenance crew? Glover's frown deepened. They're busy with other things. You are free for the moment, and so am I. Then his face cleared, and he slapped Britton on the back. Come on, fella, snap out of it. It'll do us both good to put on the suits and get out in free space. Britton uttered grumbling noises about a guy can't even finish a cup of coffee, and followed Glover out to the maintenance lock nearest the ion source. As he climbed out of the airlock, there again came the sensation of vertigo which he felt every time he stood on this island suspended in nothingness. The circumference of the donut stretched its great arc away from him in both directions, while 12 miles away, at the center of the circle, was the spherical shape of the radiotelescope receiver. The long, slender girders which bound the station together had a fragile, spidery appearance. Britton and Glover walked clumsily to the linear accelerator which projected 1 billion-volt protons into the initial lap of their long journey around the donut. At the far end of the 100-foot tube, within a shielded chamber, was the glass bottle of the ion source. Normally, a brilliant crimson flame glowed within this bottle as numberless protons were stripped from their electrons to be hurled down the accelerator tube. Now there was nothing but the blackened, dead glass. As they approached the chamber that surrounded the ion source, Britton found that the resentment left over from the previous night had a new object upon which to fasten. Why should he be doing the work that belonged to the technicians? In his anger, he lost sight of the fact that Professor Glover was out there doing the same thing. Damned slave labor, he thought. A PhD candidate was at the bottom of the heap, the lowest form of existence pushed around by everybody else. Glover thought he was being clever, pushing him off the project, making excuses about security, when probably his aim was to keep for himself the Nobel Prize that the experiment was going to receive someday. Thought he could keep his poor stupid student in the dark about the outcome of the experiment. But the poor student wasn't as stupid as he thought. Glover reached the hatch that opened into the ion source chamber and started undoing the fastenings. Suddenly he turned and stared at Britton. Here's the new ion source, he snapped. Don't tell me you left it in the airlock. Britton stammered wordlessly, shocked out of his reverie. Well, of all the stupid, go back and get it. I'll remove the old source. Glover turned his back and continued to unfasten the hatch. Rage came into full bloom instantly. Without an instant's thought, Britton reached out both hands, wrenched the antenna rod from Glover's back, tore his anchoring lines from their snaps, and pushed the struggling body out into space, where it soon dwindled away into a tiny speck. 2. Dr. Morris. Wolf leaned back in his chair after Jim Britton was wheeled asleep from the therapy room. In a random fashion, he let his mind wander over the story he had just heard, savoring not only the facts, but the feelings behind them and the intuitions which they built up in his own mind. Well, Alma, what do you think? He said, swiveling his chair to look at the other doctor across his desk. She hesitated. The story seems satisfactory, up to a point. That is, we've broken through the memory block and have determined that Glover's death was not really an accident, which of course we suspected all along, and we have a motive, of a sort. Wolf sighed. Yes, the motive. The boy feels that Glover is cutting him out of the credit for an important experiment, so in a burst of anger he disposes of the professor. There are just two things that bother me about that. Look. He switched on his desk projector and ran through the microfilm card of Britton's record until he came to the examinations which Britton had taken to get the post on the space station. Here we have the standard Jameson test for paranoid personality. Obviously an important item in an examination of this sort. You wouldn't send even an incipient paranoid into close quarters with a group of people for 2 years. And so, in the case of Jim Britton, the Jameson test gives a negative result. No evidence of any paranoia, and in fact, no evidence of any neurosis except the drive to do research. Alma Heller lit a cigarette thoughtfully. I see. No paranoia predicted, yet the story he tells us now is a typical textbook example of persecution. Psychosis. Of course. She paused for a moment. He might be making up this story to hide his real motive. Wolf shook his head vigorously. No dice, not under deep therapy. He has to tell us the truth, so we have a paradox. Dr. Heller's methodical mind ticked off the possibilities systematically. Either the early exam was wrong, in which case he was paranoid all the time, or the exam was right and he turned paranoid later. Neither of which things are supposed to happen. Or, Wolf presented the third possibility. He is withholding information while in deep therapy. Also, something that is not supposed to happen. So this leads us to the second point that bothers me. Britton talks about sitting up all night trying to figure out what his experiment was leading to, yet he never mentioned what conclusion he came to. Apparently this is a crucial point which is buried in his mind so deeply that we didn't touch it with our first try. Could be. Alma Heller seemed skeptical. There are a lot of very iffy questions running around in my head which could be settled simply if we could get some concrete information. Do you think you could buzz the AEC and ask them why Britton's project became classified? That would settle a number of obscure points, and at the same time give us a handle with which to pry Jim open a little more. Wolf shrugged. We might get our heads chopped off, but we can try. My contact at the AEC is Charles Wayford. He's the one who was so anxious to know what Britton did the night of the 15th. Maybe he can trade us some information. Wolf pushed the button for an outside line and asked for the Atomic Energy Commission. Extension 5972. Wilford's image appeared on the phone screen, the picture of a large, powerful face with a great mass of gray hair. Wolf knew him only as someone high up in the personnel department of the AEC. Good morning, Dr. Wolf, he said. Find anything out? Wolf shrugged. Britton killed Glover, if that's what you want to know. But why? That's what really interests us. You can tell us one thing that will help us find out. And that is, did Glover really take Britton off his project for security reasons? If so, what were those reasons? Wilford's face froze slightly. Obviously, Dr. Wolf, if security were involved, it is a matter I cannot discuss with you, especially over the phone. You may write me a full confidential report, and we will consider what is to be done. Wolf cut the connection in exasperation and pushed his chair away from the desk. Well, there is a bureaucratic mind for you, he exclaimed. He wants a problem solved, and then refuses to give you the information necessary to solve the problem. Slowly, he filled his thinking pipe and lit it. The hell with them, he said finally. We'll see this thing through ourselves. We'll have another session with Britton tomorrow and get to the bottom of his story. I hope, Alma Heller added, that there is a bottom to be found. As the attendants strapped Jim Britton on the table the next morning, Dr. Wolf thought how often the formula for murder repeated itself in this psychiatric age. Knock off the victim, prepare a real sick motive, and be sure you'll go to a hospital for treatment, to be released after a cure. Under these circumstances, the psychiatrist must become a detective, required to dig deep for the real motive, which generally resolved itself into the classical ones. To love, hate money. From his point of view as a doctor, any murder was a sick act, but the authorities were interested only in the legal question of whether the murderer knew what he was doing and why. In this case, the question of the motive had a fascination to Wolf even from a purely academic point of view. Let's face it, he told Britton. We both know you killed Glover. You've heard the playback of yesterday's session, so you can no longer fall back on the old excuse of, everything went black and when I came to, he was dead. Nobody gets away with that anymore. Britton maintained a sullen silence. Just for the record, Wolf continued, I want to fill in an important gap in the story. You told us that you sat up half the night, figuring out what discovery your experiment was aiming at, but you glossed over what you actually decided at that time. Suppose we return to that night and go over the story once more in a little more detail. Britton continued his silence, and beyond a single hostile glare from beneath half-lidded eyes, gave no expression of emotion. Wolf, as he checked the connections and slipped Britton the hypodermic, was thankful that his technique did not depend upon a friendly rapport between doctor and patient. Presently, Britton began to talk. You're being taken off the project because it has become classified secret, Glover had said, and at a blow an entire year of work had been struck out from beneath Jim Britton's feet. As he sat in his room, he picked raucous chords on his guitar and allowed the anger to wash deliciously through his consciousness. Not for a minute did he believe the security classification story. He knew that the project was beginning to strike gold in an unexpected direction, and he knew what that direction was. There was a discovery in the making, a discovery so precious that for every diamond-like star out there beyond the porthole, there could be a bucket of diamonds accruing to the discoverer. And Glover was after the prophet himself, pushing Britton out of the way. This was the thought that clawed little furrows in his mind. Then pushing their way into those little furrows came other thoughts such as, suppose Glover should have an accident, I'd have his notebooks, and... Then he began thinking of returning to Earth, and the vision of spending a life dedicated to research in a laboratory became clouded over. Instead, there arose a picture of himself riding in an expensive car with beautiful, expensive women. He ripped a full chord out of his guitar and began to sing. In the morning, Glover stopped at Britton's breakfast table, annoyed with word of the ion source burnout. Now, how are we going to get it fixed? He demanded in exasperation. Gamp cut his hand yesterday. Williams had his appendix out a week ago. Langsdorff is busy with the Kix order. And... Why don't we do it ourselves? Britton interrupted eagerly. It'll do us good to get into spacesuits again. It would do Jim Britton some good, he thought to himself. If genius was measured by the ability to spot an opportunity, then his success was assured. The plan of action was in his mind completely formed in that instant. On the outer skin of the satellite, the two of them alone, any one of a number of accidents could occur. Holding them down against the pull of centrifugal force would be only the magnetic shoes and a thin line. From that beginning, his mind went precisely to its conclusion. Alma, Morris Wolf said, I am beginning to feel very uneasy. What do we have here? He poured coffee into the cups on his desk. Alma Heller looked at him shrewdly and stirred sugar into her cup. I think we have a bear by the tail, she said. We seem to peel off layers of Jim Britton's mind, and each time there is something different underneath. Every time he tells his story, there is something new and contradictory in it, and there is no clue as to whether he is getting nearer or farther from the truth. Wolf swiveled his chair around and stared out of the window onto the hospital lawn. We thought that the deep therapy method was something perfect, something that would make a patient tell the absolute truth as he saw it. But our patient is making hash out of it. He lifted his coffee cup and tasted the black liquid tentatively. Follow it through the first story he gave us was conscious. He said he couldn't remember exactly what happened to him. Okay, this could be a fabrication. The next story he gave under therapy conditions. He said that he killed Glover in a fit of rage because of an argument. Okay, again, we could have accepted that at face value, and he would have gotten away with it, except that we got curious about a couple of things. We wondered how the paranoid tinge got into his thoughts. And we wondered exactly what it was that he and Glover were on the verge of discovering. So he tried again. Now we find that he deliberately plotted to kill Glover, and the paranoid symptoms are now so intense that he gives us a completely phony story about making millions of dollars out of the discovery, when everybody knows that you can't patent anything for personal profit when you invent it in a government laboratory. Alma Heller lifted her hand, making a 1 with her forefinger. So our friend Jim Britton is doing two things, both of which we did not believe him capable of doing. First, he is lying and inventing stories under deep therapy. Second, he is withholding information. For notice that he is still avoiding specific mention of the result which his experiment was aiming at. Her voice became flat, precise, and probing. Now, could our young physicist Jim Britton do this thing? No, not unless he is an unsuspected Superman type. Or unless he has had special training and conditioning for resistance against deep therapy. How does a young physics student obtain such training, and where? She looked across the desk at Morris Wolfe, who chewed savagely on his pipe bit. If I had any sense, he growled, I'd call up the ASC and throw Jim Britton right back in their faces. If they give me a problem to solve, they should at least tell me how hot they think it is. And my viscera are beginning to tell me that this is going to be a very, very warm baby. Maybe I should holler for help. I have a wife and 2 kids at home. I don't want to get hurt. Who you kidding? Alma wanted to know. You wouldn't let a juicy problem like this escape you just when you have it clutched about the middle. Besides, our 2 undercover friends from the FBI will be keeping their eyes on things. Let them earn their pay, okay? Wolfe came to a decision. We'll give it one more try, and then we'll call for help. First thing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, there are 2 things I want. First, I want Britton to have a complete physical examination. The works, inside and outside, blood tests, electroencephalograph, tissue specimens, complete x-rays, everything they can think of. Then I'll spend tonight keeping company with Britton while the technicians pull down some overtime, pay analyzing the examination results. Do you have an idea? He nodded. At least one idea, but it needs feeding. That evening, Morris Wolfe walked down the hospital corridor past the door of Britton's room. He entered the next door and found himself in a tiny chamber already occupied by Bill Grady. This was no surprise, for he knew that Grady and Jones kept Britton under constant surveillance. He motioned for Grady to keep his seat and made himself comfortable in another chair, which he placed so that he could watch Britton through the one-way window set in the wall. Through this window he could see every move which Britton made, and through a loudspeaker he could hear every sound. It was not clear in Wolfe's mind precisely what he expected to find by watching Britton, but he knew that if he was to unravel his puzzle, he must know everything about the boy, including the way he walked and talked and combed his hair. For a time Britton sat and read, then paced the floor restlessly, as if waiting for something. Finally, he picked his guitar up from the bed and sat down on his chair, tuning the instrument. When he began to sing, it was quietly as though to himself. Wolfe had heard him sing before, generally folk songs from the southern and midwestern states. Now there intruded into Wolfe's mind a thought which had previously been on the edge of consciousness, and simultaneously his hand reached out to touch the start button on his tape recorder. The manner in which a person sings should reveal a great deal about his early life, about the kind of language he grew up with, down to the very vocal structure which has developed in his body since childhood. As a result, there are many types of voices: French voices, Tennessee voices, Italian voices, Texas voices, each with its own flavor, caused by the way in which the vocal muscles have been trained by the native language, and also by the way in which people are accustomed to singing in those places. When Wolfe went home that night, he carried a tape of Britton's song with him. It was convenient that he did not have to go far for an expert opinion to corroborate what he had already decided as an amateur. He entered his house, the pleasant place with the warm colors, the rows of books, the grand piano, and of course, his wife. Sorry I had to stay late, dear, but there is something important going on. Something really important, and you can be a big help to me right now. Me? Asked Lynn. You are going back to musical therapy? Not exactly, he said dryly. More like musical detection. I am going to play a tape recording of a song or two, and I want your professional opinion as to what part of the world the singer came from. He walked over to the recorder and began threading the tape. Now pay no attention to the song itself, he instructed. I am interested only in the voice quality. The tape spool unrolled slowly, and Britton's voice filled the room. Not bad for an amateur, Lynn commented, listening closely. For several minutes she remained silent, until finally the tape was completed. Well, she said finally, I don't think it's an American. A bit too rich. It doesn't have the French quality, nor the Italian, more chesty, kind of ripe and fruity. Central European, Hungarian, Russian, or something of that order. Wolf kissed her solemnly. You win first prize, girl. That's the answer I wanted, and that's the answer that fits. 3. In the morning, the act of going to the hospital produced within him a sensation as of marching to the front line of battle. Whitehead, the laboratory chief, was prowling about his office when he arrived. Morning, Wolf greeted him. Got something for me? I have a strangeness, Whitehead said. A very great strangeness. We all do, Wolf replied. What's yours? This Briton of yours. How old is he? By appearance, and according to the records, about 21. Uh-huh. And by cellular structure and metabolism, he is at least 40. So. Wolf sank down in his chair and cocked an eye at Alma Heller, who came into the room at that moment. Did you hear that, Alma? In more ways than one, our boy isn't what he seems to be. By last night, I was certain that he is not a native of Louisville, Kentucky. Now we are told that he is twice as old as we thought he was. Alma stared for a moment. We do seem to get in deeper and deeper. Have any ideas? Wolf ran his hand worriedly through his hair. One. But I'm afraid of it. At any rate, we're in too far to back out this morning. We're going to dig for more information. And we're not going to stop until we have Britain squeezed dry. He reached onto his desk for his tobacco can and began filling a pipe, meanwhile organizing his thoughts. Somehow or other, he resumed, Britain has received conditioning to resist giving information under deep therapy. And not only that, Alma interposed, but he has the ability to retain consciousness under deep therapy and fabricate a story to replace the true facts. Correct. So, since the ordinary deep therapy method is useless, we have to get tough. We have to eliminate his present set of conditioned reactions and replace them by a new set. In other words, we must reset the controls so that he responds to a new set of orders. Alma pursed her lips for a soundless whistle. Fisher's method. Do you know how much of that a nervous system can take? Wolf shrugged. Who knows? This is very new stuff. I've played around with a little of it. But who knows, at any rate, we're going to assume that Britain has a fairly tough mind in order to get as far as he has. We'll assume this not only for his own sake, but for ours. Because we are going to shake him loose from his present set of memories, and we want enough of his original memories left for us to assemble. Now, suppose we begin. Whitehead excused himself. There was work waiting in his laboratory, he said, and watched wistfully as the two disappeared into the therapy room. Alma began switching on the apparatus, while Wolf called for Jim Britton to be brought in. Still going digging in my mind, Britton wisecracked as he walked in, flanked by the ubiquitous Grady and Jones. With a steam shovel, Wolf replied, and motioned that Britton be strapped onto the table. This time, Wolf wasted no explanations. Without pausing, he slipped Britain a preliminary shot and began fitting electrodes onto his head and arms. "We're going back a long time now," he said quietly. "Remember, back to the days before you started college. How old are you?" Britain began dreaming off. 16 years old. It was a hot summer Kentucky in summer. Hot. Hot as a solar cycle. Hot as a bicycle down the road. A tricycle down the toad. "Doctor, you look like a big, pimply, warty, green-eyed toad." Morris Wolf waited until the drug-induced schizophrenic symptoms were well underway, then motioned for Alma Heller to send a sequence of high-frequency pulses through Britain's nervous system, breaking down synapses and destroying memory patterns. This, in combination with the drug, was intended to clear the mind of memories involving the period of time to which Britain's attention had been directed. In this period, Wolf guessed, the conditioning had taken place. If not, then he must try another period. Britain's body stiffened under the onslaught, and perspiration rolled out on his brow. His mouth twisted, and his eyebrows writhed. Morris Wolf himself felt perspiration starting out on his face, while in the back of the room the two attendants stared in amazement. After enough time of this, Wolf switched the controls so that a rhythmic pattern of pulses went through Britain's system in such a manner as to aid the triggering of synapse and the formation of memory patterns. The slate having been wiped clean, new writing had to be placed on it. "Now," he said tensely, leaning over the patient and speaking close to his ears, "cooperation means obey. Cooperation means obey. Cooperation means you do what I say. Cooperation means you do what I tell you to do. Say what I tell you to say. Remember what I tell you to remember." Cooperation is the key word. The words went from Wolf's mouth to Britain's ears in the form of sound waves, were converted into neuroelectrical impulses. And under the influence of the rhythmically repeating pulses from the machine circulated around and around through Britain's system, tracing a deeply etched path. Finally, Wolf ceased the talking, and Alma handed him the needle with the antidote to the first drug. "Now we see how successful we are," he said. He gave the shot, and several minutes went by while they waited for it to take effect. They remained silent, as though to say a word would break the spell. "Then cooperation," Wolf said. Britain lay still. "Open your eyes." Britain's eyelids struggled open, but the eyes stared blankly. Wolf thought, what question is most basic? Then he asked, "What is your name?" The mouth writhed and then whispered, "Pyotr Firminiev." There was a small roaring in Morris Wolf's ears, and beside him he heard the intake of Alma Heller's breath. The FBI agents, Grady and Jones, had moved up until they were leaning over Wolf's shoulder. Then, "Where were you born?" Again the whisper from the blank face, "In Leningrad." Then, "Who sent you to America?" "The Society for the Restoration of the Revolution." "What is the nature of this organization?" "It is an underground group, pledged to return the Soviet Union to its status as the leader of the world revolution and to overthrow the present appeasers of the capitalist governments." Wolf glowed with triumph. "Get that, Alma?" he gloated, and he turned around halfway and winked at the two men behind him. Alma Heller shook a strand of hair back from her eyes. "The fanatical revolutionaries. Now they're trying to overthrow their own government because the Soviet is too friendly to the Western governments." "This is no comic underground group," Wolf said. "There are some big people in it who know how to do things that we're just barely starting to learn about." He paused and considered his next questions. The time had come to dig in. He phrased his query, What was your task on the satellite? Britton's face writhed. Perspiration rolled down his cheeks in a steady stream. Obviously, some of the original conditioning remained, causing interference with Wolf's orders. Alma Heller's knuckles showed white, and her clenched hands trembled. The FBI agents inched forward, their bodies stiff with impatience. Between hard breaths, the words came. Was on the satellite to watch new developments in nuclear power, complete conversion matter to energy. Understanding grew in Wolf's mind with a brilliant glare. Glover had been on the verge of taming the ultimate source of energy, the total and complete conversion of matter, a source of power over 130 times more potent than the hydrogen-helium reaction. No wonder the project had been put under wraps. So you killed Glover to prevent him from continuing his work. What did you intend to gain by that? Somebody else will take it over. How are you going to develop this power source yourself? Britton groaned audibly. His back arched, and his arms strained against the table straps, through clenched teeth. Rupert? Next man in line for Glover's job. One of us. Wolf's eyes opened wide, and he whirled to the telephone. I am calling Washington, he began, then stopped in horror. Behind him, Britton's voice said in a strangely firm tone, Now is the time. Wolf whirled again. He saw Britton, still strapped to the table, his eyes unglazed and his facial expression commanding. The FBI men had stiffened and were standing in place motionless. Cover them and untie me, Britton rapped out in a voice that was greatly different from the youthful, uncertain tone he had previously used. Grady pulled his gun, backed Wolf and Alma Heller against the wall, while Jones loosened Britton's straps. So you are one of them too, Grady, Wolf growled. And you, Jones, may you burn in hell. Don't malign them, said Britton, sitting up and rubbing his arms. They are good, loyal G-men. But they sat outside my door too long, and now they do what I tell them to do. Wolf narrowed his eyes and stared at Britton. Just what are you? He demanded. Britton met his gaze bleakly and ignored the question. We have a rendezvous to make. The two of you will escort me to a helicopter that Grady will order. I need not repeat that we are prepared to blast our way out of this place. You'll save lives all around by being as inconspicuous as possible. He indicated that Wolf and Alma Heller would go ahead, while the two agents took up the rear. Out in the main corridor, they merged into the confused traffic of the busy hospital. 2 doctors and 2 attendants conducting a patient out. Grady took the controls of the helicopter that waited for them out on the parking lot. As they climbed to a high traffic lane, Jones took care of tying the hands of the 2 doctors behind their seats. Britton sat beside the pilot, staring through the windshield. Head due west, 100 miles, he said. Then I'll give you further directions. Wolf looked down through the port next to him and felt his heart constrict as he saw the houses below grow smaller and smaller. One of those houses was his. There was a small figure beside it that could have been his little boy. That was the thought that set his heart beating violently, and the adrenaline pumping swiftly through his veins. For himself, he didn't care so much, but his son needed a father to come home. He looked at Alma sitting beside him, her face pale and frightened. He wondered how much time there was before the rendezvous, for this was all the time he had. Beyond that were too many unknown factors to consider. He leaned over sideways. Alma, he said in a voice not loud enough to carry forward over the roar of the motor. Tell me exactly what happened when Britton said, now is the time. My back was turned then. Just what did he look like? Alma swallowed. She composed her face and turned her thoughts inward, remembering. There was a sudden change, she said. One moment he was in the trance state. The next moment he was fully aware of his surroundings and in charge of the situation. As though he received a signal at that instant. A signal, Wolf thought, from where the implication was shocking. Look at what we have, he continued to himself. Britain comes to me, under conditioning, ready to act out his part to the hilt. We question him under deep hypnotherapy and he comes forth with a plausible story. We might have stopped right there, but we got curious and began to ask more questions. He brings out another story. Why, obviously red herrings to confuse the issue? To stall for time, we apply more pressure. Blank out his original conditioning so that he gives us straight answers to questions and we are getting along fine. Then suddenly he snaps out of it and into his original pre-Britain character. All 40 years of him. Therefore, there must have been another deeper level to the control over his mind which we did not even touch. A level activated by a new signal which we did not even detect. A signal which came at a crucial time. Now is the time meant that the stalling was over, that the preparations for Britain's escape were completed. There were still questions to be answered, many blank spaces to be filled in. But at the present instant there was only one question that mattered. The treatment which Wolfe had given Britain, had it been at all effective? Was it still effective? There was one way to find out. Morris Wolfe leaned forward and called in a loud voice, "Pyotr Fermeniev!" The man's head snapped around. "Cooperation is the key word," Wolfe shouted. Confusion passed over Britain's face as conflict once more gnawed at his nervous system. Wolfe threw his second punch immediately. "Tell Jones to cut me loose," he demanded. "Cut him loose," Britain echoed in bewilderment. After an interminable interval, Jones laid down his gun, found his knife, opened it, and slashed the cords from Wolfe's arms. Wolfe's muscles were already tensed. He snatched Jones's gun, lurched forward, and even as Britain's mouth opened to countermand his order, he slugged Britain with the butt of the pistol, hitting him viciously and hard until he lay unconscious on the floor. Then he said to Grady, "You'd better get us back to the hospital," keeping the gun in his hand. But Grady and Jones made no trouble. With Britain out of the picture, they obeyed the one obviously in command. Poor boys, Wolfe thought. Now they were in need of therapy. As the hospital hove into view, he said to Alma Heller, "We have just seen the real beginning of psychological warfare, where it took us a whole room full of equipment to condition Britain's responses to a trigger word. He was able to do it to Jones and Brady single-handed. His method is something we'd like to know. But more than that, Britain himself was conditioned to respond to a signal unknown to us and undetected by us. My God, it could only have been telepathic." Alma Heller's eyes closed for a moment. "I think," she said, "that psychiatrists are going to reach the same position that physicists did during World War II. Morris Wolfe looked dourly out of the window, watching the hospital balloon up under the helicopter. "That's the most unpleasant thing anybody has said all day," he replied. And A Formula for Murder by Milton A. Rothman. The Creature Inside by Jack Sharkey. "How much did they tell you about the fix we're in?" said Dr. Alan Burgess to his visitor. Lieutenant Jerry Norcross shook his head. "They said you'd fill me in. They said it was urgent." Burgess paused, lighted a cigarette, then belatedly offered one to Jerry, who declined. "Well," he said, interspersing his words with short, nervous puffs of smoke, "about a year ago, I stumbled on a way to reverse the process of an electroencephalograph to play pre-recorded thoughts and experiences to a man's mind. You zoologists with your contact process for penetrating newly discovered fauna's minds will be familiar with the process. Luckily for us," Jerry eyed him. "Go on." "My development involves an infinitely selective feedback. We give the subject a saturating dose of inflowing concepts. His mind is free to choose among them and to link them. Take bigness, affluence, and danger for an instance. The subject puts them together and fleshes them out, He could experience a large, expensive fission bomb falling onto him, or he could be sacrificed to an immense golden idol, or anything that his inner mind chose. "I begin to understand," said Jerry. "The overlay influences all the senses. The subject thinks he's really undergoing whatever he conjures up, and you use it for therapy, letting him work off his aggressions and frustrations in what seems to him an actual universe." "Correct. Except for the tense," said Alan Burgess. "I was doing that until Monday of this week." He leaned forward across the desk. "We screen the subjects carefully because certain psychoses could be disastrous to the subject in my device. Paranoia, for instance. The man would be amid unutterable horrors with danger on every side. He'd emerge a gibbering idiot if he didn't die of heart failure first. Emerge?" asked Jerry, frowning. "I'd assumed you used a helmet such as we do in Contact." Burgess sighed. "Unfortunately, I am paying the penalty of lone wolf experimentation. I wish I'd had the sense to route the input to the brain through a helmet, but I didn't. Instead, I installed the person in an observation room. The influencing factor was nutrition. Intravenous feedings wouldn't have served the purpose of the observer. Sometimes the subject's choice of foodstuffs is significant. He had to be let move about, his mind in a make-believe world, but his body actually moving about a room we could see into. So, I had an atomic duplicator installed. The hospital got one last year for making radium, turning cancerous growths into normal flesh, regrowing bone and the like. Should the subject then grow hungry, the duplicator would be triggered by his conviction of eating in his mind. He might be hanging from a branch by his tail, for instance. The duplicator's production of bananas, coconuts, or whatever would give us a further clue to his state of mind. You see, so far, sound enough, Dr. Burgess," said Jerry. "So what went wrong?" "I assume something did, or I wouldn't be here. We made a terrible error. We tried observing a man named Anthony Mawson in our gadget. I diagnosed his case as simple inferiority complex. My fault. Wrong diagnosis. Mawson has megalomania, a gorgeous case of it, of course. He's not the first such case to fool psychiatrists. You see, his outward shyness, soft-spoken voice, and general gawkishness is due to feeling superior to others, not the reverse. He feels smarter, stronger, braver, etc. than everybody else in creation, but he also feels that nobody knows it but himself, hence his indrawing, his brooding, taciturn gentility." Jerry Norpris prodded. "What happened with Mawson when you put him in your machine?" "I don't know," said Burgess. "No one's been able to see into the machine since he entered it on Monday. He couldn't have escaped. No, I wish he had. Anthony Mawson is still in that room in his own private universe, and we can't get him out of it. We've tried cutting the power to the machine. The opacity inside the room remains. We sent 2 men in after him. They never came out." "How could he possibly?" asked Jerry. Burgess shook his head. "We can only guess. Our theory is that he's used the duplicator to make the entire room self-sustaining. Normally, we could wait till he runs out of material to feed the duplicator, but we can't wait on the lives of those 2 men. Nor can we chance his expanding his universe," Norcris frowned. "Expanding it?" Burgess nodded. "By perhaps feeding the duplicator with the room itself. With a pickaxe, he can start hewing down the very walls, or even have the duplicator build a robot that will take care of its need for material to build with. Against this development, we have surrounded the room completely with a force shield, limiting his outward progress to 2 feet of concrete in any direction, but the room is approximately 30 feet square and 20 feet high. With all that mass, he could exist in there for years, and my job is to get him out," said Jerry. "Yes. The government feels that a contact specialist's the only kind of man to send into this madman's world. You men are used to extrasomatic experiences, and you have learned to live with danger without losing your heads." "Well," said Jerry, getting up, "I guess that sums up the situation sufficiently." Burgess nodded sadly. "Any further briefing is useless." "Impossible. Really. I've told you the situation, and you can certainly imagine the danger. But as for the solution, well, you'll just have to feel your way and do whatever you think best." Jerry paused beside Burgess at the door to the hall. "One thing, though, Doctor. When I get into the influence of the machine, what kind of universe will I be in?" "Mine or Mawson's?" "I can only theorize on that," said Burgess. "My guess would be that you'll find both in there, one vying for supremacy over the other. This fight won't be man to man. It will be universe against universe." There had been no sensation at all as Jerry stepped through the flat sheet of grayness in the doorway. No more physical awareness than a blind man might feel when passing through the beam of a powerful light. Perhaps there was a slight sensation of the mere presence of the energies that kept the opacity in existence, but that sensation, Jerry knew, was psychological, not actual. Although, he realized, as his world became an infinity of opalescent gray, in this place, a psychological awareness will be no different from a genuine physical sensation. Better be careful what I think about in this psychokinetic fog. The thought was barely formulated when the grayness changed. It became moist against his flesh and started swirling in tendrils about him. "Damn it! Be careful," he belatedly cautioned his mind. "Now, the stuff is fog." Ahead of him in the swirling mist, a brighter than gray glow led his footsteps forward. He found himself standing beneath an overhanging marquee. Its black undersurface was runneled with condensed moisture amid the garish naked bulbs that haloed the wet cement sidewalk. A red-coated doorman, resplendent behind rows of bright brassy buttons, gave him a smile as he pulled open the door that led to the club. Jerry nodded and went inside. Thick crimson carpet cushioned his footfalls as he moved cautiously through an empty lobby, then down a white marble staircase toward the ballroom. Dimly, he was aware that the band at the far end of the mammoth room was playing music. What song he didn't know until a chance chording reminded him of a popular song of the day. At which point, that suddenly was the tune. The tables ringing. The dance floor were covered with bright linen and shining silver. The tables were empty of patrons, however, until Jerry casually thought, "I should think business would be better." Suddenly, a horde of laughing couples appeared in the chairs, with hurrying waiters bringing champagne, trays, and menus to their guests. The men wore tuxedos, the women were in evening dress. He looked suddenly at himself and saw that his uniform was now the official dress uniform of the Space Corps. Before he could conquer it, his mind voiced a quick wish that he shouldn't be dining alone. And then a girl was rising from her place at a table beside the dance floor, hurrying to greet him, hands outstretched. Her fingers were small and strong and warm. She smiled up at him. "Jerry, darling." Despite her being only arm's length from him, he could not see her well at all. His impression was merely one of youth, loveliness, and girlness. But then, as he tried to ascertain precisely what she looked like, hidden corners of his mind began to supply each detail an instant before his conscious quest for it. And Jerry, in a few moments, was suddenly staggered with delighted shock. Very few men are privileged to find a girl who lives up to all their dreams of perfection in a woman. Hair as soft as cobweb, as fluffy as dancing clouds, as golden as flowing honey, cascaded down about a slender alabaster throat, and dyed in golden ripples on smooth white shoulders. Eyes, the rich brown of raw chocolate, gazed serenely at him from under red gold brows and jet lashes, their patrician serenity permeated with a touch of twinkling impishness. Her lips were soft and not unlike berry-stained velvet, sweet and warm and tempting. her mouth generous and tilted at the corners into a smile of greeting, obviously the result of her subduing a frank laugh of joy at seeing him. Geometrically, perfect teeth flashed white as porcelain between her lips. Her gown was a shimmering midnight blue, highlighted with random sprinkles of brightly coruscating gems. Even as his lips parted to ask her name, Jerry knew it and spoke it softly. "Carol, listen," she said softly, tilting her head toward where the band had begun a new song. Swift, urgent, and rapturous, it floated through the room, surrounded the two of them, took possession of them. Then Carol was in his arms, and Jerry was dancing out onto the floor with her. The other couples were a blur of forgotten figures that swayed. Jerry knew the melody. It was their song, their own private love song, the one that had been playing on the night when they both knew, suddenly, that there could be no one else for either of them but the other. As they returned to their table, Jerry realized that Carol was now garbed in a white peasant blouse and bright flowered flaring skirt, and that her hair was drawn back at the temples to expose her ears now adorned with golden hoops. The table was in a lattice-backed booth, covered with a red and white checkered cloth. The inner surface of the table held salt, pepper, grated cheese, and breadsticks, matching cruets of pale olive oil and dark vinegar. The band was now a 5-man gypsy ensemble. "Remember the first time we came here, Jerry?" asked Carol, her eyes at once upon his face and distant, dreamy. As she smiled, Jerry noticed with dull horror that one of her eyes was perceptibly lower than the other. The teeth she flashed his way were mottled with brown stains. She took hold of his fingers with her own. "Carol," he said shakily, staring at the knuckly red raw hands that clutched at his. "What's happening?" "Happening," she said, her voice a raucous croak of amusement. "Nothing's happening. In fact, you are probably one of the dullest guys I ever got stuck with." She tossed her head petulantly. Coarse, straw-colored hair flipped away from her thick neck. Her breath was sour with wine and miasmic with garlic. "Carol," he cried. "Don't whine," she snapped viciously. "I hate a guy who whines." With that, she shoved out of the booth and waddled toward the rear of the coffee house, one hand scratching at a bulge of flesh that overhung the too-tight girdle. Her black leotards were twisted and dull as she passed the flashing rainbow lights of the brassy jukebox. Jerry shoved away from the table, overturning his coffee in its cracked china cup, and he wove his way through the reek and smoke toward the door through which she'd vanished. When he got there, the door was a peeling poster on a bare brick wall, advertising some long-forgotten show. His fingers scrabbled on rough mortar for a moment. Then he turned and paced back to his cot, where he flopped on his back in the long shadows of the bars. "Norcris," said the guard coming into the cell. "This is it." The brass uniform buttons flashed brightly. Strong hands were lifting him from the cot, dragging him down a long corridor toward a steel door. As they got there, the door opened wide, and Jerry saw the gaping maw of hungry steel gears, while behind him a man's voice droned prayers. Then, before the guard could shove Jerry forward into that waiting mechanical mouth, Jerry noticed the odd shimmer of grayness that lay between himself and the waiting teeth, and he remembered that he was in a world of illusion. At precisely that moment he knew beyond a doubt that those waiting jaws were illusion in form only. An atomic duplicator does not have to chew its intake. It merely dissolves the atomic bonds, with the rays that flash between its power plates on either side of the disruption platform. The waiting mouth and teeth were mere symbols, in Jerry's mind, of what was about to occur. They were unreal, but they could be fatal. He shut his eyes, shoved backward with his feet, and thought of Carol as he'd first glimpsed her. When he opened his eyes once more, She was standing before him in her ballroom gown again, and the band was just beginning to play their song once more. "Jerry," she said, taking his arm. "Dance with me." "No, we're in danger here. Come on, I'll get your coat. We've got to go away quickly." A spark of alarm showed briefly in her eyes. Then she nodded wordlessly and hurried up the marble staircase with him to the lobby. Jerry got her coat from the check room, a marvelous silvery fur that covered her from neck to waist, and then they were heading out into the fog together. "Good evening to you, sir," said the doorman, eyes and buttons bright. Jerry grunted and led Carol off down the street into the fog. "Where are we going?" she asked, breathlessly trying to keep pace. "Away, I hope," he said. Even their movement from the ballroom could be sheer illusion. Jerry tried moving from the club entrance in the exact reverse of the motion in which he'd first approached it, trying to achieve the real doorway that led from the experimental room into the antiseptic hospital corridor where Burgess waited. But the fog continued to be fog. It would not take on the form of that intangible gray shimmering that guarded the entrance to Anthony Mawson's megalomaniac universe. "If I could only see where," he began. Then every tendril of fog was gone. Behind him lay the cold blackness of outer space, pinpointed with hard, unwinking stars. Jerry recoiled from the viewplate, shaken, and turned around to see Carol. Her eyes were wide and startled as she glanced about at the metal confines of the control cabin. Jerry had just time enough to think how incongruous she looked in her fur jacket and long blue-black gown. And then she was clothed in the neat gray uniform of the WA's prim short-sleeved shirt and sharply creased shorts. "Jerry," said Carol. She slipped her arm through his, staring at the infinite stars in the viewplate. "What are we running from?" He tried to think, but could not remember. "There is some danger behind us. We have to get away from it, Carol. It means complete destruction if we're caught." Carol stared helplessly at the stars in the viewplate. "But where are we running to?" Jerry shook his head. "Impossible to tell, not without the help of a good astrogator. Out in space, stars shift and magnitudes change. I am not even qualified to guess." "Sire," said the astrogator, handing a clipboard to Jerry, "we can reach any of these 7 stars in a few hours. Just tell me where you'd prefer to go." Jerry turned to the man, resplendent in his neat Space Corps uniform, jacket bright with brass buttons. When he tried to focus upon the man's features, he could detect nothing. "We'd better choose the quickest trip," Jerry said after a moment's indecision. "No telling how much fuel we have left." The astrogator nodded. "I am afraid that's out of my department." "All right, sir, but if you'd care to check the tanks." Without waiting for a reply, the man turned and began to pick his way carefully toward the rear of the spaceship, stepping from girder to girder. The floor, Jerry noticed idly as he followed, was exposed to open space between the curving ribs of steel that formed the framework of the ship. "Careful now," he said, helping Carol along from one to the other. "That's vacuum out there. We don't want to fall through." Ahead of Jerry, the implacable man with the brass buttons was nearly to the steel door masking the blast chamber where the components of fuel were mingled and ignited. Jerry, giddily aware of every hazardous step over the squares of star-speckled blackness, kept one hand on Carol's arm, the other on her chessboard. "Don't spill any of the men," she cautioned, as the diminutive plastic figures danced and rattled on the board. "I don't intend to search the whole cosmos for a pawn." "Here you go, sir," said the politely insistent astrogator, opening the steel door. Before Jerry yawned an oval of intense white flame, the radiating heat crisping against his skin and hair. "The fission rate," Jerry mumbled, consulting his wristwatch. "I've got to time it or I won't be able to calculate the amount of fuel still in the bulkheads." "Count it by steps, sir," suggested the astrogator. 1, said Jerry, stepping out toward that blinding coruscation of heat. "True," he said, feeling carefully for the next girder. Then the toe of his boot slipped from the metal, and he realized with a horrible lancing of adrenaline through his abdomen that he was falling out the opening between the girders. The only salvation would be a shove with his still-braced rear foot, but that would carry him directly into the inferno of burning fuel. An eternity of falling through icy vacuum against an instant of intolerable searing pain. "The fire!" gasped Jerry, toppling in inexorable slow motion toward starry darkness, a cloud of twirling chess pieces orbiting about his head. "I've got to make it into the fire." He tensed the muscles of the laggard leg for the spring that would carry him to destruction, and then he saw that the chess pieces were shimmering gray, and the oval frame of the doorway to the flaming fuel was shimmering gray. And even what had seemed hot white burning was cold gray, waiting mist. And with a yell of remembrance, Jerry clamped, shut his eyes, and let himself plunge downward into nothingness. "Are you all right, Norcris?" Jerry blinked slowly, then focused on the face of Dr. Alan Burgess. He found himself lying on a narrow, white-sheeted cart in the corridor outside the room where all the trouble had begun. "Mawson," he said groggily. "Is he?" Burgess nodded wearily. "Still in there, in full control of his one-man universe. What happened?" "Norcris, you came tumbling out that door like a wild man, clawing the air and yelling. Then you went into shock. You've been unconscious for 2 hours. I thought I was falling," Jerry admitted. "The last thing I remember is stepping through the open space between a spaceship supporting girders." "What open space?" said Burgess, frowning curiously. Jerry shook his head. "There isn't any such thing, but something happens to logic in that room. It's like having a dream, Doctor. Things that would startle you in everyday life seem correct, even familiar. But there is a kind of pattern to events. At first, I am in my universe, and mostly in control. Then little fragments of my pseudo-reality start slipping, changing into other things. The changes seem perfectly normal to me then. All at once the guy with the brass buttons turns up, and I've managed in the nick of time twice to realize that I was about to be sent or led between the disrupting plates of your atomic duplicator." "The man with the brass buttons," Burgess said slowly. "Do you think it's Mawson? Either him or a robot he's made to keep his machine fed?" When Burgess scowled, Jerry shrugged and appended, "It is his machine for all practical purposes. He's the boss of that hungry electronic monster. Doctor. However, the hospital feels about it. This Carol, is she a real woman, or a figment of your imagination, wishful thinking?" "She's real enough," Jerry sighed. "She's the personal secretary of the entire space zoology program. I take her out sometimes. There is nothing special between us, but you wish there were," said Burgess. Jerry stared at him. "What makes you think that?" Burgess tilted his head toward the room where Mawson still maintained control. "Your vision's in there. You must think a lot of her. You can kid yourself consciously, but nearly all you underwent in there came straight from your subconscious, and the subconscious just doesn't know how to lie." Jerry changed the subject. "What's our next move? How soon can I go back after Mawson?" "You can't. Mawson's knowledge of this Carol can easily be turned to your disadvantage. He can use her to lead you to dissolution in there." "No, it's much too risky. You were lucky you got out when you did. But what about Mawson, then?" Burgess tried to look confident. He failed. "We can ring up your headquarters and ask for another man. Or, if worse comes to worse, we can partition off this part of the hospital and just sit it out until Mawson runs out of atomic building blocks, which may take years," Jerry reminded him. Burgess turned his palms upward. "What else can we do?" "Send me again," said Jerry. "I know the score pretty well. Now I know what to watch out for. I'm sure that with one more try, I can get Mawson out of there." "Sorry," Burgess said, shaking his head. "As a medical man, I cannot permit it. You've had a bad shock. We'll try someone else if your outfit will send someone and see what happens. If he fails or if they won't supply us with any more men, then, well, you can try again in a few weeks if you are still game, but not nigh. Doctor, in a few weeks, Mawson will be so well in control of that universe that he may find a way to block the entrance. Have you thought of that?" "His universe is not a real one," Burgess began. "But that duplicator is real enough. It can make anything he decides he needs. And at any time he may get the bright idea of simply mounting his machine right at the entrance. So anyone stepping into that gray field will be powdered into atoms instantly." "That's true enough," admitted Burgess. "But my diagnosis still stands. For now, you are off this assignment. When I feel you are ready, assuming nothing else, has succeeded meantime, I'll contact you at the base." "How do you know I won't be off on some other planet by then?" asked Jerry bitterly. "I don't," said Burgess. "I hope you are not, but there isn't anything further I can do about it." "I am sorry. And what do I do in the meantime?" Burgess grinned. "Call up this Carol and go out on the town." Jerry shook his head at the last part. "No, thanks. I prefer Carol to know nothing about it." Burgess shrugged and gave it up. "All right, Norcris. Rest here till you feel stronger. Then you are free to go." Then he was striding off down the corridor. After a bit, Jerry sat up cautiously, let the slight giddiness subside, then swung his legs off the side of the cart and got down. Behind him, the door to Mawson's universe stood open on its wall of grayness. Jerry stared thoughtfully at it, then saw that the two interns who were guarding the opposite ends of this section of the hospital corridor were hesitantly half-starting toward him. Jerry knew he could be through that doorway and into the grayness before they got within 10 feet of him. Then his shoulders slumped, and he turned and walked toward the elevators. Burgess was right. He felt worn out and uninclined to make grandstand plays. Besides, he thought, thumbing the elevator button, it would be nice to see the real Carol again, after her nebulous pseudo-self. He wanted very much to put his arms around a girl who wouldn't suddenly turn into something horrible in his embrace. The steel doors slid open before him, and the elevator boy leaned out to check the corridor for other passengers. "Down," he said. Jerry nodded and started into the elevator. Then he hesitated and looked back toward the room where Mawson reigned supreme, then back at the elevator boy. "Say," he said uncertainly, "that's a strange outfit for an elevator attendant in a hospital. I'd have expected an orderly in an all-white get-up." The boy glanced down at his uniform, the bright blue pants, shined black shoes, and scarlet jacket bright with twin rows of brass buttons. "I suppose it is," he said, "but I don't usually run this elevator. I am from the hotel next door. I am just doing this while the regular guy takes his coffee break." Jerry hesitated, then stepped toward the waiting elevator with its pale gray walls, and stopped again. His hand went to his forehead bewilderedly. "There is something," he said. Then Carol was beside him, slipping her arm through his. "Come on, Jerry," she said urgently. "We'll be late for our date." Jerry looked at her, then at the hotel corridor behind her, then again at the waiting elevator. "I have the oddest feeling something's wrong," he said. I don't remember coming over here for you." "You didn't," she said promptly. "I came for you, Jerry." "This is your hotel, remember?" Dr. Burgess said. "You'd had a bad shock." "But I didn't know how bad till now'd shock," said Jerry. "What shock? What was bothering me?" Carol smiled tightly. Nothing. Nothing at all. Come on, Jerry, darling. Again, she drew him toward the elevator. If I could only remember, he said uneasily, on the brink of that open cube of bright grayness. Then his eyes focused upon the brass buttons fronting the boy's jacket, and at his own shadow as it passed across those glowing hemispheres. As the shadow crossed a button, the color would die, and the button would be dull crystal, and then glow bright and brassy again when the shadow had passed. Photoelectric cells, said Jerry. Light-sensitive cells. Those aren't buttons, they're eyes. Mulso robot eyes. He staggered away from the boy. Carol stopped him. The elevator boy suddenly half again. Jerry's height was towering over him, long steel arms extending like hooked telescopes toward him. "Get in, Jerry, get in!" cried Carol, struggling to push him forward toward those invincible metal clamps. In a fury of fear, Jerry fought her, grappled with her, twisted to avoid those extending robot hands that would drag him to destruction. And suddenly Carol was screaming his name, and her eyes were pools of terror and betrayal, and the leaping metal fingers had buried themselves in the soft flesh of her shoulders and dragged her back into grayness. Incredible energies came alive about her. And then there was only a shimmer of dusty crystalline winds, and she was gone. Jerry found himself standing before the still warm plates of the atomic duplicator, in the room where Mawson had had his short-lived universe. Beside the machine, a squat cubic box dangled limp steel arms, its rows of photoelectric cells losing their golden glow. And then, as Burgess came hurrying in through the door, he toppled over in a dead faint. "So, there is no such person as Carol," said Burgess, standing at the foot of the hospital bed. "She was only the figment of your imagination." "Yes," said Jerry dully, "and all along it was Mawson I was really with. He was clever, all right. She was certainly the last occupant of that crazy place I was likely to attack. If he had not tried attacking me himself, I might be atom dust by now. A little longer. And he, might have talked me into that elevator." "Well," said Burgess, "I am sorry this thing ended with Mawson's dissolution, but that can't be helped." "You did your job well, Lieutenant. Thanks," said Jerry expressionlessly. "To come so near death so many times." Burgess shuddered. "You have a remarkable constitution not to have cracked under such a strain. Lieutenant, you are a lucky man." And Jerry, his mind still filled with a vision of golden hair, soft brown eyes, and warm, eager lips, could only echo wearily, "Very lucky." End of The Creature Inside by Jack Sharkey.